had to do that. I divorced thee 3 times, spin around, say a prayer, and everything was sorted.
How are you? Happy New Year.
Yeah, how was the trip?
The trip was wonderful. Bit of a shock coming back to this.
Yeah, but it was a bit of a shock, wasn't it?
Yeah, there we are.
Listen,
what are you talking about?
Musk. I think Musk is actually, I think he's gone mad, and I'm now looking at some of his other tweets.
Power mad.
Is power mad? Maybe he's smoking something he shouldn't be smoking while he's tweeting.
Yeah, well, again, can I just say, by the way, once again, Keir Starmer, we're going to take on the agenda, and he's lost it again already. You're up next. Big thanks, Sam Armstrong. I'm Julia Hollybrew. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. This is the new year kicking in properly. I mean, some of us have been back at work already. I'm sure loads of you have already done a week's worth in 2025. But today, official day back, official divorce day, official the world's gone nuts again day as well. As you've been hearing, Elon Musk withdrawing his support for the head of Reform UK, stating, as you will be well aware now, that Nigel Farage doesn't have what it takes. I'm not absolutely sure Elon Musk has what it takes any longer. We'll look at that in a few moments. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has accused the Tesla tycoon of spreading lies and being desperate for attention, escalating the war of words over the grooming gang scandal. I mean, it is fair to say, if you take a look at Elon's tweets, he's genuinely making some stuff up now. We'll look at that too. And the Prime Minister says NHS reform in England is the cornerstone of rebuilding Britain, as he unveiled plans to add 2 million extra appointments by next next year to tackle the waiting list crisis. Right now, 7.5 million people languish on an NHS waiting list. Your stories around that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. The number you will need at this end, 0344 499 1000. You can message us 87222. If you want to bypass the queues, to coin a phrase, you can drop a voice note to us, 87222, and we'll throw as many of those on air as we can as well. I want to talk, I've always been intrigued by Elon Musk. I've always intrigued by the sort of plutocratic nature of these kind of characters, whether they're Bezos or Gates or any of these people. I think if you become a billionaire, something happens to you. I think there is almost inevitable, an irredeemable reality about being in possession of that much wonga that simply changes you. It is so beyond super rich. You can't fail to be a person whose life will take a tilt or a turn or a full-on 180 as a result of your wealth. You become, whether you like it or not, sort of influential. People request your opinion. Those that have found themselves that far up the financial ladder have invariably got there because of an initial determination in the world of business or commerce or engineering or technology, whatever it happens to be, pharmaceuticals. And these characters, by definition, there is a sort of a narcissistic underpinning to these people. If you look at people like Bill Gates, and I know Bill Gates divides the room for lots of reasons, but he's a bit of a weirdo, right? I mean, you wouldn't break bread with the man saying that was an enjoyable night. You know it would be awkward and clunky and odd. And I've always said exactly the same about Elon Musk. I've always thought he's a bit of a nut job. But, you know, a genius nut job is how we've had things arrive in the civilized world, whether it is great works of art, music, whether it's the issue of innovation, engineering, invention, all that kind of stuff. You know, you find people do sit on a certain part of the spectrum. And what goes along with that, sometimes genius, sometimes brilliance, sometimes a mixture of that, a little bit of luck thrown in as well, being in the right place, taking risks. Nick Hanauer, who was one of the, I think he was one of the Amazon, initial Amazon founders. I'm pretty sure he said this on a TED Talk once, but he said, I don't have a particular talent other than the ability to take risk in areas where many people before him would have gone, nope, I'm never doing that. He said, I don't know why. He said, I wasn't trained in that world. I just have an innate risk-taking facet to my makeup, my personality, my psychology, my biology, etc. So all of these guys are sort of, you know, we use that term, the flawed genius, etc. Of course, what has happened now, we can see this stuff play out in public because of social media. At the weekend, Elon Musk, I'm tempted to say almost out of nowhere, decided that he wasn't just going to no longer support Nigel Farage. He would go a little further and talk about Nigel Farage doesn't have what it takes. I mean, this is quite unequivocal. It's like, how did you get there? Is that really over a bloke in prison? Or is it, I don't believe it is, by the way. It can't be, because no one could be that stupid to draw that analysis, unless Elon Musk sort of is. Now, he might have been smoking something he shouldn't have been smoking when he wrote this. He then put his support onto Rupert Lowe, very capable Reform UK MP as well, and off it's gone from there. And then I, you know, had a little look today. I mean, the guy's obsessed with sort of UK politics. He wrote about 5 hours ago on X, America should liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government. And then he's done a poll on it as well. 661,000 people have currently taken part. It's been viewed by 10 million people. So what goes with great power is, you'd have thought, a great deal of responsibility. I don't honestly believe Elon Musk knows very much about British politics. I don't think he's kind of on it. And there's a whole set of issues that he's opined on. He's retweeting Kate Hoey. He's retweeting Ben Habib. He's got both friends of the show. He's retweeting Geert Wilders. He's retweeting Bob in Arbroath. There's nothing that he doesn't once in a while throw. The guy is tweeting at such a rapid... I know he owns X. It's kind of looking a bit deranged. He sort of has... Look, I'm the last person in the world to defend Keir Starmer in any shape or form. I don't think any of us on this station defend Keir Starmer. But he does sort of have a bit of a Starmer derangement syndrome going on. He's sort of taken the nuggets of a few headlines and sort of tried to make it all fit together. He's come out in favour of Robinson, the bloke who's in jail for contempt, nothing to do with any of the sort of grooming stuff or any of that. He's in jail for contempt over a completely separate issue. It's a prison sentence that's way too long, in my opinion. Should have been done and dusted in about 6 weeks for that kind of thing. You don't get... But in this country, it has always carried a disproportionately lengthy prison sentence. I've never understood it. Forget Robinson, other people that have been jailed for this. It can't just be over that. But my question is this, really. Does Reform UK need Elon Musk? 0344 499 1000. Not only do I think they don't need Elon Musk, I think they will be better without Elon Musk. The problem is, if he keeps chipping in, his voice is very loud, and therefore, just by definition of who he is, it sort of becomes inevitably influential. I don't think there's a sort of a reverse gear on that one. Maybe he'll just get fed up and move on to someone else. Maybe he'll move on to Trudeau, but Trudeau's likely to be gone in a couple of days, by the way, in Canada. So there's some good news. I'm not seeing Musk say very much about what's happening in Canada, the nearest country to where he lives. But nonetheless, do Reform UK need Elon Musk? I think it was a dalliance that... And by the way, this man is just as likely in about 2 weeks' time to go, I got it all wrong, I now support Nigel again. Are we taking this bloke seriously? I mean, take him seriously on his cars. I know he didn't invent them, but he made all the money out of them. Or his spaceships. I know he didn't invent them, but he made all the money. Or X. I know he didn't invent it, but he made... In fact, he didn't really invent anything. He just did the right business deals, transactions, takeovers, raising money. Takes a great brain to do that, but that's his thing. So who knows where he'll go next? Does Reform need Elon Musk? I think they have been freed of something here. I think there would have been a problem down the track for Reform if they'd kept up this bizarre relationship with Musk. I suppose there are implications of what it means for their relationship with Donald Trump now. We will watch with interest, because there is no doubt about it. Elon Musk is not just a billionaire. I think is he $200 billion more than the next on the list of billionaires, which I think is Jeff Bezos. I mean, it's extraordinary wealth. We sort of all know that. But he's the president of the United States, the next president in a few weeks' time, couple of weeks. He's his right-hand man, essentially. So this man has influence. What does it mean for Reform? What do you make of this almost a kind of musky meltdown or breakdown? I don't know. I'm a bit concerned about the boy. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and a few of the other big stories of the day. Robert Taylor, political commentator, is back with us. How are you doing, Robert?
I'm very well, Ian. How are you?
All right. I mean, if somebody had said to us a couple of days ago that this is extraordinary what happened over the weekend. Suddenly, it appears to be out of nowhere. We have this curious situation where Elon Musk, who was breaking bread with Mr. Farage 3 weeks ago in Florida, is not only saying, I don't support this guy, he's going a little deeper than that by saying he hasn't got what it takes. Let's just have a little listen first to Nigel Farage responding to all of this about Elon, well, responding to Elon's donation, first of all, when he was speaking to Koonsberg on the BBC.
And is his friend, Elon Musk, now your friend, and is he going to give you millions of pounds?
Well, that's a real question, isn't it? Now, forget about the $100 million being talked about in the newspapers.
Are you going to give you money?
That is for the birds.
Is he going to give you money?
He may well do. He may well do. But it's got to be legal. He's got to be comfortable with it. He may well give us money. Whether he does or not, I'll tell you what he gives us. With huge numbers of young people, he makes us look cool.
Is the reason you hope he's going to give you money, is that why you don't want to criticise him?
I think I've made it perfectly clear that I don't agree with everything he stands for. but I do believe in free speech. I think he's a hero, and I said that well before any potential money was offered.
Not long after that interview, Elon Musk said Nigel Farage is not up to the job, Robert. What a curious turn of events. You wouldn't stick this in a Netflix show. It's so bizarre.
You wouldn't. I happened to be on X, just sort of looking at various tweets when that X posting from Elon Musk came through. I couldn't believe it. I just assumed that it must be a sort of parody account that I was looking at, given their love-in over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But no, it was genuine. It sort of threw a sort of hand grenade into British politics yesterday afternoon. Everyone was suddenly reacting to it, tweeting about it, retweeting it. It was extraordinary and totally, totally unexpected.
Do you think, I mean, is it really over Tommy Robinson? I mean, this is just extraordinary. You know, most people in fact, most people in the country probably don't even know who Tommy Robinson is, but those that follow politics and are aware of the backstory of the guy would be more than a little surprised to think this guy who's currently in clink is being talked about in these conversations. Elon Musk calling for his release. And Nigel Farage, of course, had said on more than one occasion, Richard Tice has echoed it as well, that, you know, Robinson isn't for us, he's not part of our party, although in fairness to Robinson, I don't think he's even asked to be in the Reform Party, but I think he did talk about not dividing the right. So now you've got this curious situation, and the smart money seems to suggest, Robert, that Musk's disposition of, or his change of support for Mr Farage is based on their differing views of Tommy Robinson. Again, what a stupid sentence that is that I've just uttered. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that appears to be where the issue is.
Yeah, I can't think of it being anything else. And it may be that when Farage said over the weekend that he'd have to go to Trump's inauguration and have a chat with Musk and put Musk right on a couple of issues, it may have felt to Musk that Farage was being slightly patronising in his tone with that. I can't think of anything else, because it was only a couple of weeks ago that someone tweeted, Britain needs reform, and Musk responded with the single word, absolutely. So
yes.
He was back on side for Farage then, but now he's changed his tune altogether. It's most bizarre.
And do you think this has any implication? I mean, there's a lot of, or there's some concern, bearing in mind how close Elon Musk is to Trump, as to whether this has any effect in Mr Farage's relationship with Mr Trump.
Well, that's the big question. It's only a couple of weeks away now, isn't it, until the inauguration. And Farage, he can afford to lose Musk. I think you said in your intro, Ian, that he could probably shrug that off, and I agree with you on that one. But Farage certainly cannot afford to lose Trump. So it'd be fascinating to see if this spat over the weekend has any impact on that. I think the jury's out whether this works for Farage and that he's no longer associated with this weirdo, as you described, Musk, but also, you know, he's losing potentially the money.
Yeah.
So it could go either way.
Or as I said as well, I mean, it could be one of those things that in 2 weeks' time, Musk just turns it around again and goes, no, I've changed my mind. I like Nigel now, which I don't know where that leaves us. Interestingly, this has the whole Musk thing, which has kind of come out of nowhere, implications for a different reason. For Sir Keir Starmer, he's accused Elon Musk of spreading lies and being desperate for attention. The war of words over grooming gang scandals has escalated. Let's have a listen to what the Prime Minister said on this morning.
This is the year we roll up our sleeves and reform the NHS. A new era of convenience in care, faster treatment at your fingertips, patients in control, an NHS fit for the future.
There it is. That clearly was the wrong clip, Robert. This, however, is... we'll come to that clip later. This, however, I'm told, is the right clip.
Those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote. And those attacking Jess Phillips, who I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend, not protecting victims. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they've even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career.
Well, there's a lot in that. I mean, I very rarely agree with Keir Starmer. I think some of what he said is not unreasonable, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm like you, very rarely defend Keir Starmer, quite the opposite. But I was almost cheering him on with that sentiment. I don't think British people like having powerful foreigners getting in the way in British politics. We didn't like it with Barack Obama when he talked about Britain being at the back of the queue for a deal with America. We didn't like that. We don't like it when rich, powerful foreigners get involved. We don't like it, really. Most of us don't like it when Musk gets involved, even if we don't like Keir Starmer. I do think, however, Ian, that Starmer has invited more criticism from Musk by doing that. It's a brave thing to do. And I think Starmer was wrong to say later that those who are asking for an inquiry into the awful events in Oldham, the grooming scandal, are, I quote, jumping on a bandwagon of the far right. We're not far right if we're worried about what's happening in Oldham. So he got that bit horribly wrong.
Yeah, and that has been the problem, I think, with it, because it's not in their... I don't know, it's not in their DNA, I don't sense, when it comes to the grooming gangs, and because of the obvious underpinning commonality of those specific crimes. I think Labour members and MPs and those on the left just find it intrinsically difficult to get animated about that for one good reason, that they don't want to be seen to get involved in a discussion where either race or nationality or culture or religion is central to the discussion.
Yes, and that is, of course, inexcusable. And that is why a lot of people, myself included, would love to see another national inquiry into what happened in Oldham and why these people are allowed to get away with it, and why those in power seem to have facilitated that horrible crime. We've got to surely get to the bottom of that. If that means another national inquiry, let's have it.
Yeah. Robert, stay with us. Robert Taylor is with us, the political commentator, looking at the big stories of the day. Over to you as well in a few moments. Drop us a voice note, 87222, on the phones, 0344 499 1000. Does Reform UK need Elon Musk? I don't think they do. In fact, I think some shackles have been removed by these recent events. 0344 499 1000.
he's sitting there, and what's being done about it? Nothing. I mean,
well, that's not
the spurious reason that he was
the
put
reason,
in for.
Yeah, but the reason, Errol,
his reason that he was put in because he didn't attend a court appearance. I mean, that's laughable, you know. I mean, that's totally laughable.
Well, I mean, the fact is that he had an opportunity to not be in contempt of court. He chose to be in contempt of court, and that's why he's in prison. So he's in there really because of his own actions, Errol.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A couple of comments from you. One here, no name given. You don't like it when Americans get involved with comments about UK politics, but nor do Americans like the UK, and especially Labour Party, getting involved directly in US elections. I don't think the Labour Party ever did do that. I mean, they sent, the party didn't send. A load of party workers went out to the United States to support the Democrats, which has happened, I think, every election for about 70 years, where the Tories send out a group of people to help the Republicans and the Labour send out a group. That's not really the same thing as this. Obama speaking out on Brexit, as Robert Taylor just said, that's in similar territory. Whether you could argue, well, he was the president, he's slightly more entitled to a view. But we didn't like it. We didn't, you know, we thought that was kind of a step too far. It wasn't very diplomatic. Now, of course, we have something called Twitter, where I guess Robert Taylor is still with us. Diplomacy goes out the window, as does context and as does truth sometimes.
So it would seem. And, you know, we've seen with Trump sort of firing off tweets in the middle of the night, according to what mood he's in. Seems that Musk does the same. I think you have to be careful with X and Twitter, because you could do that and land yourself in a bit of trouble. Yeah. It's definitely something to be on when you haven't sort of, you know, had a couple of Christmas glasses of wine.
Yeah, or been smoking the wrong type of cigarette, which, you know, Elon is a little partial to. Who knows what the heck's in it? Let's move to this one then. We accidentally played the clip a little earlier, but we'll give it to you again. This is the speech that Starmer made this morning about NHS reform and the waiting list desperately needing to be cut. Let's have a listen to what the Prime Minister said.
This is the year we roll up our sleeves and reform the NHS. A new era of convenience in care, faster treatment at your fingertips, patients in control, and NHS fit for the future.
Yes. Every person I've heard talk about this today, Robert, has all said, well, you know, we obviously, any initiative that's going to cut waiting lists is a good thing. Former health secretaries, Tories, Labour and others, yep, it's all a good idea. Not many seem convinced it can be achieved, though.
Well, no, and it's because of the way the NHS is set up, an ageing population, ever greater demand. And the fact that I always like to quote, by the way, Ian, is that since the year 2000, we got 10 more million people in this country looking for NHS services, GP appointments, etc. But we've got half the number of hospital beds that we had, and not many more doctors and nurses than we had back in 2000. So, you know, this expanding population, massive immigration since the millennium, but no expansion of the NHS to cope with it.
And I do, you know, look, obviously, if they're able to cut lists at whatever level, that's a step in the right direction. But quite a lot of their credibility rests on this, of course, because they were very big on, you know, rescuing what they say was the damage of the Tories. Although the Tories did put most of these initiatives in place to begin with, they just hadn't really got up and running.
Yeah, and I do think, again, it was a mistake. Generally, I applaud what Starmer's trying to do, push care into the community, make sure that community care is working around the clock 7 days a week so people can get appointments at the weekend, they can have scans and minor operations at the weekend. All good, the BMA, which we know is also threatening strike action at some point this year, said that that's not the issue. The issue is we need doctors and nurses. And I do think that Starmer was wrong to blame it all on the Conservative government. We know that a huge amount of the problems in the NHS is because of a backlog after lockdown, which of course Starmer supported and wanted more of throughout that horrible period.
Yeah, he would have gone a whole lot further. And here's another story. I find this fascinating. I don't know what to make of this. Wind turbines apparently have overtaken gas as Britain's most used source of energy, accounting for 29% of the UK's electricity last year. Let's just have a reminder of when Ed Miliband met with Chris Stark, whoever he is, to promote the clean energy and the wind turbines being built in Hull.
As we walk the length of this 108-metre wind turbine blade without hesitation, deviation or repetition about clean energy. Chris.
Look at the size of this thing. This monster is going to be in the seas around this country generating clean electricity in the next few months. It is amazing to see the extent of what we're doing in this country.
And what's so exciting about this is it's about energy security and lower bill. It's about tackling the climate crisis, and it's about good jobs for people here in Hull. 1,300 jobs from the manufacture at this plant. I mean, you do see the future being built here, don't you?
You do. I mean, what's not to like, really?
Trisha, who works here, said to me, every blade makes a difference.
No, she didn't. He just made that. Trisha said every blade makes a difference, apparently, Robert. Did you know that? Ask Trisha if you want to get some wisdom on the eco discussion. Well, I mean, if this is true, I mean, have we all been wrong to be a little cynical and sceptical about what Mr Miliband is up to?
Well, the plans are that we're going to have, I understand, 3,500 more wind turbines across our country by the year 2030 if Miliband's plans go ahead. Is that a good thing or is that not? Well, that depends on your view of clean energy and whether we should pay higher prices with our bills. Our bills are as high as ever. They're pretty much the highest in the world for energy, certainly higher than our competitors, but we're also the wind turbine capital of the world. So energy prices aren't coming down, Ian, with all these wind turbines going up.
Well, that's the I mean, I looked at my smart meter I actually picked it up and looked on the back of it in case there was a miniature monkey turning it around with a key or something, because this thing was going like Billio. I thought, that's bizarre. In a few hours, it doubled the amount I'd use. I know it was particularly cold, but apparently wind turbines generated 29% of electricity in 2024, surpassing gas, which fell to 25%, the lowest since 2013. I wonder if there's another interpretation of those figures. Listen, Robert, great to have you on as ever. Thank you for your time. He's Robert Taylor, the political commentator. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Janice says, Ian, it won't be any trouble to Trump and his relationship with Nigel. What a scaremonger you are. Scaremonger. It's literally the question. It's not the sick form, Janice. It's literally the question that anyone who is thinking about this conversation will naturally ask. If you've fallen out with the president's right-hand man, how does that leave your relationship with the president? I mean, it might be fine. I'm sure it will be. But it's a reasonable question. More from you in a few moments' time. Lines are open. It's 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On the app. On your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
From Dean in Oxford. Musk has done Nigel and Reform a huge favour with his nutty tweets. Nigel should not mix in his company anymore. Yeah, I mean, you've got to... What you have to separate in all of these kind of arguments, I sense, and all of these characters, is to... And it's quite hard to do, because confirmation bias, which we all suffer from to varying degrees, where you know, if somebody... If you're a supporter of someone or something, you will potentially see no wrong in that person. But sometimes you do have to take a step back and try and be objective and say, well, do you know what? I used to like this, but actually he's wrong on this. He's wrong on... or somebody who might be right on one thing but just wrong on everything else. You know, you've got to lose the emotional connection to politicians, and that's something that has saddened me no end in the last few years. The idea that you sort of, I'm a big fan of... No, you should never use that phrase if you're going to follow it with the name of a politician. I'm a big fan, I really love this, but it's not... I saw somebody tweeting about Kamala Harris as if she was Gandhi before the last election. I thought, well, you've got something wrong with you, mate. I mean, you literally have something wrong with you. That is derangement. But here we are with Mr. Musk, who, by all of his associations, was a bit of a hero to many people. But is that changing? And if it has, are you one of the people that has altered your view? Elon Musk has called for Nigel Farage to be replaced as the Reform UK leader. He says he doesn't have what it takes. This comes after Nigel Farage distanced himself from Musk's support of a man called Tommy Robinson. Farage called the remarks a surprise. The tech billionaire's potential 80 million donation, I don't think it was ever going to be 80, but that was the figure that did the rounds, is now believed to be in jeopardy. Let's speak with Mayuran Senthilnathan, former Reform UK candidate and commentator. Mayuran, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Good to be with you.
And nice to have you with us again. I mean, this firmly comes under the category of you couldn't have made this up, and certainly you couldn't have made it up half an hour ago when everything looked hunky-dory and fine and dandy, and then suddenly there's this big fallout. Based on what's been said, it will look difficult to repair. What the heck is going on here?
Well, look, I think Elon Musk is still a hero in my mind because of what he's achieved, as an entrepreneur, and also the kind of democratization of X and the freedom of speech that he's now introduced. I welcome his comments because at the end of the day, he causes disruption. And where there's disruption, there's chaos. And where there's chaos, people have to rethink things and analyse really where they stand. So it brings clarity in the ultimate sense. And it's particularly important with the mass rape gangs, that situation, scandals that have been going on. So he's brought that to light. But I would say Elon, I don't believe he understands the subtleties and the intricacies of British politics, because we have to remember, we are not in a presidential system where Nigel Farage is going to face Keir Starmer in all the states of the UK. If that was the case, you could perhaps put pressure on Nigel to move the Overton window in a faster, more robust way. But that simply isn't the case. We're in a first-past-the-post system. We are a small party. Reform is a small party that is looking to break the uni party, the establishment, which is something that happens once in 100 years. It is a colossal task.
Sure.
And it's only Nigel Farage who can do it. There is nobody else who can do it. It is Nigel Farage who has got us to this amazing position that we're in at the moment. So for Elon to say that, I'm sorry, it just sort of speaks of the fact that he probably doesn't understand the nature of politics in Britain.
Does it matter if this fallout is permanent? Is it a problem? I mean, there might be a sort of slight credibility issue for about 5 minutes, but once that's gone away, do you think it's possible that Nigel and Reform will actually take a bit of a sigh of relief?
It's possible, but if I'm honest with you, it would be great if Elon was on board. I think he is ultimately going to be an asset. He has a huge following, a huge influence. And I believe his knowledge of AI and also understanding how to run an election, I think his knowledge and expertise in that would be invaluable. So I do think it would be an asset if he joined. But I do think at the same time, believe it or not, Reform can just plough through and get the result it needs.
Yeah. I mean, the other point that I think you touched on there as well about sort of free speech and, you know, allowing more people a platform. And of course, if you speak to people from the left, they will sort of say, we don't have a platform anymore. We used to, but it's been curtailed by Musk. If you speak to people from the right, they will say, you know, we felt that our tweets never got seen as often as they should be. You know, Owen Jones was seen more times than, you know, I don't know, Nigel Farage. All of these arguments and different sides make it. But either way, is it the difficulty, I think, with Musk's tweeting is that what we can all agree on is that sort of breaking news or big comment connected to news on Twitter, as you rightly said, becomes, you know, slightly out of context, isolated without any other information, and therefore often inaccurate. And I think that's sort of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and I would also bring up another point, is that I do think there are sections of X that are now becoming echo chambers. And I think that people, let's say, have a misunderstanding of how much influence they had when it comes to, say, winning an election. So you may get hundreds of thousands of people who like your tweets and share your posts and so on. That's fantastic. But then if you knock on the door down your street and ask them their opinion of Nigel Farage or anything else, it's something quite different. And I think people who are in support, and there have been like people who are in support of Elon, who want Nigel Farage to step down or something like that because he's not strong enough on this issue or strong enough on that issue, simply don't understand how the electorate thinks across the country outside of it. And I think we need to wake up to that if you're going to win an election.
What do you think happens next then, Myron? Are we going to see Mr. Musk come back once he's, you know, stubbed out his doobie and return to sort of some semblance of normality and say, do you know what, I got that wrong, actually. I'm back on Team Nigel. I can almost see that happening.
Do you know what? I could actually see the same thing happening. I think once the dust settles, I think Elon, he fires out tweets, sometimes in a very strong way, at multiple different angles, at multiple different things. But once the dust settles, once he sees that Nigel's gaining traction, that he's making, he's breaking through the first past the post system, that potentially we could have an explosion of seats in Parliament as the general election approaches, he will see that Nigel Farage and Reform, again, is the only way change is going to happen, that the country needs a handbrake turn in terms of the direction it's going, and only Nigel Farage and Reform can deliver that. Then I think you'll see him come back on in full support of Reform, perhaps even a donation, perhaps even more.
Yeah, we will see. Myuran, thank you, as ever. Mayuran Senthilnathan, former Reform UK candidate and commentator. You can genuinely imagine that scenario, can't you, where he just sort of says, yeah, forget everything I just said. But is this how we're now doing business? You know just how often recently the media, what you'd call the mainstream media, which is the media, is now being called by some people as legacy media. I don't know what that's. It's obviously a pejorative in there. I don't really know what it's meant to mean, other than that's how it used to be. Welcome to the new world. This is the media now. Are they really referring to Twitter or X or Facebook as the new media? I mean, man alive. I mean, it's the ultimate disruptor model, yeah? In the same way that Uber come along and knock out businesses for legitimate taxi firms, predominantly over here, as we all know, or Airbnb disrupt the hotel trade by getting everybody to become a hotel owner, etc. It's kind of that, but with news. So we're disrupting news. This is news now. And you look through, I mean, does my Twitter feed just give me dodgy news? Am I the only one that sees that? Once in a while, you might see something that's, you know, reasonably sensible. Of course, legitimate news organisations also break news, which is on Twitter and X, which is where the confusion is. But most of the other stuff is just garbage, right? I mean, it's horrendously embarrassing. The kind of stuff I've read over all of this is beyond belief. It's the stuff out of a kind of weird dystopian model when the kind of Romero zombies all went to Twitter to get their news, and they were all confused because the news was not quite as they thought, and it turned the world upside down, and there was just like stuff, garbage and falsehoods and hyperbole and nonsense. And that's meant to be that's the trustworthy source for some people. I only get my news on Twitter these days. Well, you're an idiot then. Let's go to Tony in Stockport. On Elon Musk. How you doing, Tony?
Oh, fine. How are you?
Good as gold at this end. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think people are missing what Elon Musk's real motivation is. I don't think he's that bothered about British politics. I think his audience is the American audience. I think he's demonstrating to Americans who, on the whole, have a great fondness for Britain. I went to university in America and I've worked over there. And I think he's actually saying, look, these people in Britain have lost their moral compass, their political elite in Europe, in France and Germany, and in Britain. They would rather put the interests of vulnerable girls to one side in order to keep their doctrine of multiculturalism. And I think he's actually showing to the Americans, why do we defend these people? Why put all this money into NATO? You know, they look like they're beyond saving. They won't even look after their kids. They would rather look after their votes. And I think that's who is...
So that he's selling that to the sort of Trump base, as it were.
Well, yeah, because Trump wants to... I mean, Trump's view on NATO is well known.
Yeah.
And he's got a point. He's got a point, because
100%.
The American working class pay far more for the defence of Europe than European working class.
Yeah, I mean, the classic conversation of Trump and Angela Merkel a few years ago.
Yeah, we act all high and mighty, and we have our wonderful social programme, you know, our pensions, etc., etc. But that's because we don't put as much into the defence of Europe as the Americans do.
Yeah.
The Americans is well documented that if you're on low income, you can't get the health needs that you need, and yet you're paying through your taxes for the defence of a political elite in Western Europe who would rather bury their heads in the sand.
So you think...
Sorry,
I was just going to say, Tony, so you think actually this is... all that he's doing at the moment, whether it's about Nigel Farage, whether it's about the grooming gang thing, a bloke who happens to be in jail for contempt, but whether it's that, all of those things, he's trying to sort of paint a picture of European chaos.
Yeah, decadent Europe. Yeah. And it's like, what do we need Europe? Do we need to be... I think we've got to look at it from... His main target audience is Americans.
Yeah.
That's his... Right, and perhaps a world market with China. He's probably saying, look, do we need to be investing in NATO? Do we need to protect a society who won't even protect their own kids? Now, they're just, you know, I know there's things... It's not just one community that abuses kids. You know, we've had Savile, we've had...
the church.
All those. But these are gangs, and they were let off. You know,
not even investigated in some cases.
Not even one person has lost his job, and they've said it was thousands of kids. Just think of that, 1,000 girls in Rotherham.
Yeah, 1,400 girls. I mean, over 1,000 in just one. Under the jurisdiction of one council. I mean, the headlines, betray the horror of the real horror underneath it all. It's beyond belief that we ended up here with people in authority and these kind of figures, whether they're counsellors or social workers or law enforcement, whoever they happen to be, that literally turned a blind eye. That's not an exaggeration. That is a truth. I don't think that story, though, defines what we're about fully as a country. I mean, it's a dramatic and horrific chapter within it, and that's clearly what, as you rightly say, Tony, the point that Musk is picking up on. Listen, I've got to move. No other reason than time. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000.
us on and accuse us of being lying and fraudulent
What's
about our membership numbers.
Wasn't she asked to apologise?
We got a number of different media channels and journalists in to check the actual database, the back end, proved that we were right, she was completely wrong, and just said, look, we all make mistakes, just apologise, Kemi. She's refused to do that, so Nigel announced over the weekend that we're going to make our own constituency seat a key target at the next general election, just to give Kemi a little bit of something to think about.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This from Bill in Kent, who says, yes, we do need Elon Musk. He shook up the stale British establishment who've been content with their disgusting politics for far too long. He's brought attention to problems that keep getting swept under the rug. I mean, to a degree, I think we can reasonably argue that we're talking about the grooming gang, rape gang story because initially, again, we're talking about it again because of that. I don't know whether he's shaking anything else up beyond that, but that's just a view. Let's get a voice note. This comes from Rachel on Elon Musk.
I'm so angry at Keir Starmer's statement this morning that people who are looking for an inquiry are jumping on the far-right bandwagon. That's exactly the attitude that led to it being covered up, the fear of being called far-right or racist. And he has just done exactly the same thing, calling people far-right because they're calling for an inquiry. He's an absolute hypocrite. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this country who feels like they're throwing their cup of tea at the telly every time he says far-right.
Yeah. I hope that's a metaphoric cup of tea, Rachel. But you are spot on. Again, it feeds back into that comment I made earlier that the left just can't bring themselves to talk about this stuff with any level of kind of conviction. They never do, whether it's a terrorist attack, whatever it happens to be, unless it's a right-wing terrorist attack, then they're very happy to hijack that. But it's interesting, isn't it? You know, Starmer took the knee, literally got onto one knee after some fat old criminal got himself killed at the hands of the police over there in the United States, which was not a good thing, by the way. It was a terrible thing. We all know that. But Starmer took the knee for that. Is unable to show anywhere near the same level of conviction and concern over this. I know he's got there's some circumstances around his time as Director of Public Prosecutions where, you know, he made some headway into changing some rules around getting young girls taken seriously who previously weren't. But that doesn't get him out of jail on this far-right thing, which is way too easy, and it's wheeled out with absolute and effortless aplomb. Curious times. Daniel's in Epsom. What's going on, Dan? Afternoon to you and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Ian. How you doing, mate?
I'm all right, yeah, good at this end, thank you.
So I think it's about nuance, you see, that I don't think Elon Musk understands what Nigel Farage and Richard Tyson, the guys at Reform, are trying to do. They're trying to professionalise and make Reform a credible party that can win in elections. Now, I and Nigel probably agree with most of what Tommy Robinson says, right? But he can't come out and say that at the moment because if he won the election, for example, I'm sure he would get him out of jail because he's been in too long. You know, he would probably be sympathetic to 99% of the things he says. But Elon doesn't understand the nuance there, that he's trying to make this movement occur and he's trying to make Reform more credible. And that's why. I mean, I think as well, they could, if Elon Musk gave Reform 80 million or 100 million pounds, at the moment they're currently polling on about 23 or 24%. Now, when it comes to first past the post, when you get to 30%, that's when you start to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seats. So it's not that donation of, I don't know, 80 million quid at the right time with the right message could put Reform in power. And I personally think that they should make friends again, if you like, to put it in simple terms.
Sure.
And Nigel should explain the nuance of what he's trying to do. And I just think this current government, there must be millions of people out there that have voters' regret. Because we said it at the time, Ian, when you're on your show, you know, it can't get any worse than under the Tories. Oh, my God, has it got worse.
I mean, indeed. But, again, the Robinson thing I find really curious because there might... You know, I said this years ago when he gave a speech at the Oxford Union, and I thought it was brilliant, you know, seeing a working-class lad standing there against this ornate backdrop of scholarly opulence and all that goes with it, was just very powerful, and a lot of what he said was very powerful. But on that one issue, I mean, and he got some things wrong, as, you know, Starmer, to be fair, today did point out quite correctly that Robinson almost collapsed a grooming trial because of highlighting stuff while a live court case was going on. I mean, that's a terrible thing because he didn't understand. You know, he's not a journalist. He's just a guy that felt very passionately about this one issue. But beyond that one issue, Dan, I have no idea why we would listen to somebody with, you know, such breadth of convictions and all manner of other strange things. So can we not settle on going, well, OK, he might have been right on one thing, but that doesn't mean to say we call for his release from jail as a political prisoner. I mean, that's the stuff of a very bad B-list drama, isn't it?
Well, I see him a little bit differently. I've watched his film that they tried to ban,
But nobody tried to ban it, by the way. It's there for everyone to see.
I think people like him are very unpopular amongst the establishment. They don't like him. I'm not a massive fan, but I've watched a lot of his work. I watched the thing that you watched at the Oxford Union as well, and I enjoyed it. It was great. But I think that him and Nigel have probably got quite a bit, that 95% of their views are very similar. Elon just doesn't understand what Nigel's trying to achieve. And by the way, I think Nigel Farage will be our next Prime Minister. I joined Reform, £25, and a load of my friends have, because this country is going in the wrong direction, and I'm going to do everything. I might even run for them next time, because I just think that they're the only right-of-centre party left in UK politics here.
Yeah, and I think the current Conservatives are actually... I didn't think this was going to happen, but I know there's a lot of time to go before now and an election. I got a feeling they're going to be worse than the last lot on all of these areas. They are absolutely rudderless on this one. Dan, thank you. Daniel in Epsom on Musk and the implications of that. Will they make it up? Does Reform UK even need Elon Musk? I mean, I do think Elon Musk is quite mad, really. Naturally, I think Reform will do rather well with him not being the backseat driver from the wings. More of that on the way. News at 2 is next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000. 3 minutes after 2. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Elon Musk withdrawing his support from the Reform UK party. It's a big headline. So many tentacles to this story. He says that Nigel Farage needs to be replaced. Doesn't have what it takes. He says, where the heck did that come from? Having just met with him, had a cup of tea 3 weeks ago in Florida, and now suddenly he can't stand the man. What has happened there? Does Reform even need Elon Musk, would be a reasonable question. Details to come. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has accused the Tesla tycoon of spreading lies and being desperate for attention, escalating the war of words over the grooming gang scandal. Certainly done that, but has he put something back in the spotlight that should never have been removed from said spotlight? And Justin Trudeau's rule could end this week, with the Canadian Prime Minister reportedly considering resigning. Now, that really is where you will find Wokemaster HQ Central and all the rest of it, over there in Trudeau's house. We'll have more details on that to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Tony in Doncaster says, reference Elon Musk, as a member of the Reform Party, I don't have any issue with him offering substantial financial support to the party. However, if that donation is conditional upon holding sway over party policy, or whether our leader, Nigel Farage, is weak and not up to the role, causes alarm bells to sound from me. And why on earth is Elon, together with his father, championing the case of Tommy Robinson? The man is far too right-wing and a trouble causer. For me, Nigel has underlined his strength of character by distancing himself from Robinson from the very start and has never wavered on this since. And that is true. And Richard Tice, again today here on Talk, compounded and echoed all of those points as well. Thank you, Tony, for that. Let's get a word on this, I say a developing story, because we've got Musk at this very moment tweeting away. The last tweet that he got out there on his own Twitter feed was, I think, around about 5-6 hours ago now. America should liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government, and you can vote on the poll, yes or no. I mean, at the moment, let's see how it's looking. It's 61% saying yes, we need America to liberate us from the tyranny of Starmer, and 38% saying no. I don't know, why is this stuff interesting? Elon Musk so darn much right now. Let's get a word with Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter, podcast host at Politics Home. It's one of those stories, I'm sort of going to repeat, I think, Alan, a version of what I've been saying for the last couple of days. If somebody had described this entire scenario to us, a few years ago, about this billionaire that went on a thing called Twitter, and then he started then he got in favour with Nigel Farage. I mean, we would just go, whoa, stop there. House of Cards was as dramatic as we get on TV, political dramas. None of that stuff would happen. But here we are in the 21st century, in the first week of 2025, and all of this stuff is happening. It's utterly bonkers.
Yeah, it's a good reason to just delete social media altogether, I think, as you might possibly get. But I think what's interesting is that if you're Keir Starmer, had a tricky first few months, to say the least. Obviously tried to kind of reset things at the end of last year, start of the new year, first Monday back for MPs in Parliament, and kind of trying to kind of take hold of the political agenda by having this speech in Epsom about the NHS. But the problem is that no one is going to remember today for this, what is probably quite a useful partnership between the NHS and independent providers to try and get rid of these kind of massive backlogs. Everyone's going to remember it for the words that he said about Elon Musk and this continuing kind of, criticism by both sides. I think I was just just before we came on, I was just scrolling through Elon Musk's X feed to see, you know, what the latest essentially was. He seems to be retweeting a lot of kind of GB News clips and all this kind of stuff. Like, he's very, very involved in this, and is going to continue to be so. This is not the final word on this. And yeah, it's kind of hard if you're in UK politics. You want to try and wrestle a narrative back and talk about what you want to talk about, but instead, you know, all that it is about basically is Elon Musk and what he's been saying about Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, all this kind of stuff. It's not exactly how you'd want to start the new year as you try and kind of move your premiership forward.
Yeah, what's in it for Musk? I mean, and why the UK? Why has he taken such an interest? I know he's made a few roads into the German setup, very little on France or Spain, if anything at all, but he seems absolutely fascinated by what we do over here.
Yeah, I guess clearly when you're involved in the kind of the MAGA world, obviously there are links between Donald Trump, people in Donald Trump's sphere, and then people in Nigel Farage's sphere. They've obviously been, Trump and Farage had this relationship going back to kind of Brexit and his first term in office. And so I think perhaps when Elon Musk moved into that MAGA world, he got that kind of interest in UK politics. And clearly there are lots of people in the UK who think that if you tweet a lot about this stuff, Musk is going to see this stuff, and they've kind of worked out, I guess, something that he's interested in, and that they're able to kind of keep fueling it. The people are putting out content clearly on social media for him to pick up and then to amplify. And I imagine perhaps, you know, if there are similar people in Germany or other countries, that's kind of how it's going to happen. He seems like quite a capricious billionaire, as all kind of billionaires tend to be, and he kind of picks up things and puts them down again. And obviously we've already seen him kind of split with Farage at the moment. I wonder how long he will keep this interest. Obviously we know by the end of this month he'll be installed in Washington as part of this sort of department that's not a department about government efficiency, and I wonder perhaps whether the eye of Sauron might move away from the UK and more towards the stuff in America at that point.
Yes, I think you're probably right about that, and who knows, as we said earlier in the programme, Alan, knowing Musk, he could come back in 10, 12 days and go, no, I actually like Nigel now. He is the man for the job. And that genuinely wouldn't surprise me.
No.
Let's have a look at what the Prime Minister has been saying today, because he was asked a question when he should have been talking about health policies, but naturally, journalists being journalists, fired a few curveballs at him. Now, this one has sort of divided the room and infuriated some people, because he talked about, and interestingly, Elon Musk has tweeted on this as well. Starmer sort of referring to anyone asking for an inquiry into the grooming gangs, the rape gangs, whatever phrase somebody chooses to use, but again suggesting that they're sort of almost part of the far right. Now, some would argue, not unreasonably, that it's that kind of language that put us in this very position in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's quite an ungenerous reading of what he's saying. The way I sort of saw it is suggesting that it's helping that if you are interested in calling for an inquiry, it's helping to amplify people who are on the far right. I don't think he was labelling everyone who has concerns over this as being far right, and I don't think anyone would think that either. Clearly, what's happened in places like Rochdale and Oldham and over the years has been terrible and horrifying, and I don't think anyone necessarily thinks that you're far right just for thinking we should work out ways of preventing that stuff from happening in the future. But I do think that you're right. The way that it has been received by some people is suggested that, you know, if you are asking questions, if you are interested in this, then you are part of the far right. And obviously that's not, I don't think, what he wanted to try and get across. But clearly this has become a huge political dividing line at the moment. And obviously this speech today, to try and sort of draw a line under it, obviously they hadn't wanted to wade in necessarily over the last couple of days. I think after what happened, the kind of escalation over the weekend in the rhetoric from Elon Musk, I think Starmer realised that today was going to be an opportunity to do so. And his kind of very trenchant defence of Jess Phillips, I thought was pretty interesting. And I think actually, you know, from someone who's sometimes a little bit leaden-footed in terms of his communication, I thought he was pretty strong on that. But you're right, this is going to continue to rumble on. We've already seen a statement from the Conservatives, from the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, calling it disgraceful, others criticising it. So clearly, you know, people are going to try and continue to make political capital out of it, and we'll see how long this kind of rumbles on, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the things that Starmer, that Musk is picking up on about Starmer is his time as head of the CPS, of course. He tweeted Starmer was deeply complicit in the mass rapes in exchange for votes. That's what the inquiry would show. Many, of course, point to his time at the CPS. Now, in the interest of basic balance, yes, there were, of course. I mean, the idea that, by the way, that Starmer was somehow personally involved in every time something was put to the CPS is ridiculous. I mean, of course it wasn't. And none of this stuff would have been put to the CPS in quite the same way as we see it now. And I think we can blame lots of authorities, local councils, social workers, who did turn a blind eye to the obvious, for things not even getting to the CPS in the first place, or when they did, they were sort of half-baked and, you know, hardly worth the paper they were written on, because the CPS would say, well, there's no realistic chance of a prosecution here. Now, Starmer wasn't in charge for all of that time, but from 2009 he was. However, there is a suggestion that he was also influential in bringing in new rules that allowed people a greater opportunity to, when cases were a little bit wobbly, for the police to listen more carefully to victims. And Starmer, I think, has been trying to make that point in his defence.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the criticisms about Keir Starmer's time as Director of Public Prosecutions have been around for quite a long time, and the Conservatives and others on the right have often tried to use his time as the EPP to be critical and go back through those cases. And I don't think any of those kind of criticisms have ever really landed. Remember, there was that stuff around Jimmy Savile and whether he'd failed this kind of slur, he'd failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile, this kind of stuff. You know, I think there's people have often wanted to try and kind of peg this stuff to him. But I think, you know, if you take that Elon Musk tweet, for example, you're saying that he turned a blind eye in exchange for votes. Well, you know, he wasn't an MP then. He left the CPS in 2013 and then stood for Parliament in 2015. Yeah. So this idea that he would be doing something for sort of political reasons, I think you're never going to be able to make that stick. I don't think that's true. I think you're right in the sense that obviously there were lots of stuff that was people turned a blind eye and stuff never got passed up the chain. Convictions, you know, charges were never put forward because people weren't willing to gather the evidence and ask the kind of difficult questions. I think if we're talking about inquiries, you know, Alexis J had this inquiry between 2015 and 2022 that looked into a huge amount of these issues, and the fact is that they've failed to be acted upon in the 2 years since. And I think if people are pushing for more to be done, I think it's pushing for the implementation of those things to make sure this stuff doesn't continue to happen would be a much better use of your time, rather than sort of, you know, calling ministers rape apologists and all this kind of stuff. Let's have a look at another leader, but he might not be a leader by the end of the week. Justin Trudeau has been running Canada for about 150 years, it seems now. Been there for a long old time. He's part of a bit of a dynasty in the political world, planning apparently to announce his resignation as the Liberal Party leader. This comes as poor poll numbers show that, you know, many are not happy with his leadership. The Liberals are trailing 20 points behind the Conservatives. What do we make of this? And how do we judge Trudeau as a leader? And does it matter anyway? I mean, after all, Alan, it's only Canada, right? Well, I to be honest, I'd sort of forgotten in the sense that he was still the Prime Minister.
Yes, I hadn't heard his name mentioned at all in months.
I thought he obviously had a lot of trouble last year, managed to sort of to cling on. Canadian politics is a strange one. Obviously, a lot of people were looking at it early this year because they famously, their ruling Conservative Party were completely destroyed, and an insurgent party called Reform ended up doing quite well. So a lot of parallels there, you know, in Canada. But I think, yeah, it's kind of interesting. You know, I'm not sure who said it. I'm not sure if anyone really said it, but the phrase that goes around is that all political careers end in failure. And I think, you know, when you're Prime Minister of a country for quite a long time, you know, and you end up, unless you leave on your own terms, you know, after a great victory, as some do, you know, it's always going to end up clinging on towards the end. People always go on far too long. And so, yeah, I think there was probably a point at which he could have made a more dignified exit, but often people think they can turn it round, and he's been unable to. And I think, yeah, it's going to be a fairly humdrum end to quite a storied political career if he does step down by the end of this week.
Absolutely. Listen, Alan, thank you. Alan Tolhurst, Chief Reporter, podcast host at Political Home. I think any leader that suspended bank accounts of people because they refused to have a vaccination, or just simply hadn't got around to, whatever the case, deserves probably not just to be out of office, but probably deserves to be in jail. It was just the most extraordinary thing to witness in a democracy. I'm not saying that these decisions were easy for leaders at a time when we thought the bubonic plague had returned, but I think we'd established by that stage that it hadn't. And Trudeau, along with that absolute chancer in New Zealand, Ardern, between the two of them, I think gave... And it's interesting, there is a tie-in here, isn't there? They really gave rise to the narrative of what is wrong with if you like, Western politics, the groupthink of that sort of global idea that we're all going to have exactly the same policy at the same time, and not really think about whether it is the right policy, but we'll be satisfied with it because we've all said the same thing. And that's the real danger zone of that sort of global groupthink, that you find yourself just really convincing each other that by dint of agreeing to a set of rules or principles or policies, therefore it must be right. After all, we all agree with it. And that's what's been wrong with it. And that's why people like Donald Trump and Reform UK find themselves, I mean, Trump quite literally is on the precipice of power. 20th of January, he'll be sworn back in for the next term as president. We'll wait and see if he's able to do what he set out to achieve. And the just incredible inroads of Reform UK, which are, I mean, the greatest critic of reform would be able to see, surely be able to see what is happening here. Apart from people like Starmer, who can't really see it, because again, and our previous caller pointed this out, and we just talked about it there with Alan, suggesting that this is a far-right thing, calling for another inquiry, jumping on a far-right bandwagon. It's precisely that kind of speak that was responsible for the problem in the first place, Mr. Starmer. It was exactly that accusation, or that you satisfied yourself with these lousy kind of excuse, just the far right. And it's such an extraordinary stereotype of millions of people's separate views, many of whom actually come from the left as well. So I've heard there's lots of Labour people that are calling for an inquiry too. And that's the reason. That thinking, I think, will be the downfall of Starmer. It's become the downfall of Trudeau. It took many years for it to happen with Trudeau, and it might take many years for it to happen with Starmer. But in the meantime, Reform UK's star will rise in no small part down to plonkers like Trudeau and Starmer. I mean, they're literally writing this stuff for us. You can just see it out loud. This is what happened. This is why you get a Reform UK party come along. For that very reason, because it's not just filling a bit of a void, it's an entire cross-section of the British public that don't feel appeased, don't feel represented. It's not hard to work out, and Starmer works on the basis that if I say this stuff, my fan base will just run along with it, because there are plenty of other left-wing. Every one of his cabinet will say the same thing. So he's all right by saying this kind of claptrap. 0344 499 1000.
us on and accuse us of being lying and fraudulent
What's
about our membership numbers.
Wasn't she supposed to ask to apologise?
We got a number of different media channels and journalists in to check the actual database, the back end, proved that we were right, she was completely wrong, and just said, look, we all make mistakes, just apologise, Kemi. She's refused to do that, so Nigel announced over the weekend that we're going to make our own constituency seat a key target at the next general election, just to give Kemi a little bit of something to think about.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It's Talk. One here from Ian in Somerset. I think Elon Musk thinks UK politics is the same as American politics, and with his money, he'll be able to do as he pleases. We don't need Elon. And I'm glad he's dropped off Reform's Christmas card list. I would say, on balance, most of the Reform UK members that are getting in touch with us are fine with Elon Musk not being part of it. I know the amount of money he might have donated wouldn't have been 80 million, but I mean, let's say it was 10 million, would have been absolutely huge for Reform. And a new party needs it more than any other, you could reasonably argue. But I think there's a lot of people quite relaxed about the fact that he might not be around anymore, shouting from the wings or, sitting in the back seat, barking his orders. Of course, he has English connections. Was his grandmother from Liverpool, I think I'm right in saying? So that puts him, maybe, some reasoning behind his curious, slightly misplaced interest in British politics. Who knows? Michael is in Birmingham. Michael, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm going to go across what everybody said. I called this station before Christmas and said I thought Farage and Tice were not the right people to lead Reform. I'm completely with Elon Musk. What I think what he's trying to do is snuff out Trump-like, Homan-like, Josh Hawley, Kennedy-like, American attack dog, Ted Cruz, American attack dog lights, like people, not flat cap, pint a bit all very avuncular down the pub, very moderate type people. Look, if you're going to be in Reform, you have to be out there. I've looked at their website and it's very, very moderate. It babbles on about the economy and it's just a weak conservative manifesto and whatever, right? I mean, look, the people are voting Reform to stop migration, put British people first, deal with all the wokery nonsense, get rid of the DEI stuff, get Starmer in prison like Musk says, and you just got to go out there and
why does Starmer need to be in prison?
Well, I think he's imprisoned people unjustly in the summer.
He didn't imprison anybody.
His role as the DPP.
He didn't imprison anybody.
Well, no, but come on, he set it up. But look,
well, there's no evidence that he set it up.
You're not going to go down that one. What I'm saying is, right, that if you're going to go down the route of Reform, you need to be out there. Right, and you're going to get called a fascist, you're going to get called a racist, you're probably going to get called a rapist and whatever. But it didn't do Donald Trump any harm. Look, the coloured-haired, swivel-eyed lunatics that support Starmer will always support him. They're never going to vote.
Of course they will. I agree with that. But wasn't Nigel Farage doing rather well without Elon Musk?
Well, but he'd do even better with him. I mean, the nearest we've got to it... By the way, Tommy Robinson isn't the answer. The nearest we've got is probably like Lee Anderson. But where we're throwing Musk's money away is that if he can get some American connections over, show how to get a decent infrastructure in place, go on about the messaging, right? Maybe even get some senior Americans to come over here and speak out. That'll shiver Starmer's timbers.
But the bit I don't get, Michael, in what you're saying is that Nigel Farage, even critics of Nigel Farage, all argue he's one of the greatest orators and electioneering people that we have among us. I mean, the guy is incredibly convincing. He can stand at a podium without a script and talk for 2 hours. He can do a TV debate. He doesn't need the notes, etc. So who would we have that could match all of that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe that's what Musk is trying to snuff out, because the answer is I don't know. The nearest we've got to it, you know, you need to be, forgive me if I sound like a professional northerner, you need to be a bit rough, tough and in a huff, frankly. And the nearest we've got is like Lee Anderson. But there should be other people. And I put my money where my mouth is. I'm not a Reform member, but I've put myself forward to stand as a councillor in my area for Reform. And I certainly won't pull any punches. And I'll take a milkshake and give it back. You know what I mean? So you know, and I will deliver them. I'm not going to babble on about the economy. I'm going to say, you know, people coming across the channel prosecuted on the spot. And that's the sort of messages that we need to be getting across. And what Musk has said on Twitter today, couldn't agree more. Yes, Starmer does belong in prison one way or another. Make it happen. Yes, Britain does need...
I don't want to dwell on just one point. I just can't work out why Starmer... I mean, I don't like Starmer. I can't stand Starmer. He's everything I hate about politics. I don't know why he should be in jail. I mean, metaphorically...
Well, he belongs in jail as much as somebody that put a relatively innocent tweet.
Well, if anybody was jailed for a relatively innocent tweet, of course.
Well, yeah, you know, well, whatever.
I mean, there were lots of people that shouldn't have been jailed. But then, look, I'm going to draw your attention, though, Michael, to 2011 during the London riots when they did the same thing and chucked a load of people in jail for nicking. One guy got 18 months for nicking a bottle of water. You know, I mean, it's not new. It's not a Starmer thing.
That's riotous behaviour, isn't it? I mean, that's not necessarily... I mean, look, there's difference between riotous behaviour and kind of like political thing. And what Musk could bring is, don't get me wrong, the Swivelites, they will resort to lawfare. So for Reform candidates, they will try and get them in prison. And Musk's money can help people defend their cases as well, if you stand for Reform. So there's all sorts of things, because they will try and put you in jail. I mean, look at the way Starmer's reacted to his incompetence about the grooming gangs already. Look at it. It's absolutely reprehensible.
Yeah, well, he used the same line as... I mean, look, the Southport thing, I think, is very complex. I don't think it's a straight case, again, just ordinary, you know. It's quite funny, the amount of coppers that took a beating that night, and then the very people responsible were up there saying, well, what about the Manchester airport story? You know, I think there's a lot more to it. People went to jail who should never have gone to jail. You're bang on about that, Michael. But nonetheless, there were some people who were out for a scrap, right?
Didn't say that they're not, but then again, aren't there people out for a scrap at the Palestine marches, but they don't seem to go to jail?
Yeah, well, perhaps there are. I mean, anybody who's out for a scrap should be treated seriously. Yeah, I think we send way too many people to jail for that matter.
Those little public school boys who dress up as Antifa and put silly bicycle helmets on.
They're great, aren't they?
I mean, they seem to get away with whatever they want, don't they?
Well, I mean, again, perception is a wonderful thing. I love it. Listen, great conversation, Michael. Thank you for that. Let's get a voice note on this issue from Peter.
Why do we just not go straight to the National Crime Agency investigating who the criminals are that have been doing this, who has covered this up and taking out prosecutions against them? And by that, I mean councillors, MPs, senior police officials. This is long overdue.
It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder, you know, whether in the wake of the re-emergence of the grooming gang or rape... It's interesting we use the term rape gang, or we've kind of opted more to refer to it as to what it is, with the belief that grooming gang sort of underplays what went on. I did hear one victim say over the course of the weekend that she felt that the term grooming gang was appropriate, that grooming is not it's not a mild kind of like non-offence. In fact, the whole episode was enabled because specifically of grooming. That was the key factor in the criminality here. And she was happier that we used the phrase grooming. But either way, I wonder whether, whatever term people are comfortable using, whether there are people now sitting in council offices who did turn a blind eye, people who should have pursued a line of inquiry or a concern or a report, whether they happen to be in law enforcement, social services, local authorities, whoever they happen to be. because there is no doubt on this one. Look, we can often look at stories where, you know, the headline is a bit of a betrayal, really, of the facts, and you realise that once you dig deep, actually the story isn't anywhere near what we first thought, and there's not really anything to see there. And living in an upside-down world, governed by social media and Alice in Wonderland-like politics, that happens all too often. This is almost the reverse of that. This is a case where the headline doesn't go anywhere near to doing justice of the horror of the detail. And so when Mr. Starmer talks about those calling for an inquiry are jumping on the far-right bandwagon, yeah, I can sit here calling him an idiot all day long. It's more than an outrage. It's exactly that kind of thinking that this whole point is centred on. The ignoring of, the delicacies, the sensitivities. It's that. It's literally that. Here's Starmer doing it again. 0344 499 1000. And maybe he should be in jail for crimes of idiocy more than anything. It's 2:30. Lots more to come. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
From Paul in from Medway, Meaday. Where's Meaday? I know Medway. Anyway, Paul says, Elon Musk is a genius, so my theory is as follows. Elon tweets about gangs and brings the cover-up stroke handling to the forefront. He shows no one is up to the job at fixing it while the light is on him. He tweets Nigel is not up to the job, knowing he actually is. So Nigel comes out and handles the situation like he's the right man for the job, and doing so shows non-Nigel reform supporters he actually is prime ministerial in his response and gaining even more support. So I think this whole thing is genius and will help Nigel and reform. Love the show. It's a great theory. I would love to believe that's exactly what has happened. I mean, it might be the stuff of drama, Paul, but the theory is fantastic. Wouldn't that be something? And let's go to this story, which does have some interesting connections. Foreign nationals are more than 3 times as likely to be arrested for sexual offences as British citizens. That's according to the first analysis of its kind by the Centre for Migration Control. This is data from police, the Home Office and the Office of National Statistics. More than 9,000 foreign nationals were arrested for sexual offences in England and Wales last year, making up a quarter of such arrests. Kevin Hurley is a former Detective Chief Superintendent, often helps us out on these kind of stories. Afternoon to you, Kevin. I mean, it's naturally a fairly dramatic figure to see this. One would reasonably say, why this disproportionality? Can you shine any light?
Well, I mean, I don't really think there's any research or evidence being done on it, but as someone who's worked and travelled broadly in some of the areas where a lot of these people have come from, I would say it comes down to cultural values. So, if you like, the rump of the population in the UK have a certain way of behaving and have a certain attitude towards females, which may not necessarily be found in other parts of the world, perhaps the Middle East, certain parts of South Asia, and so on. And as a result, the attitude to females that is a cultural one, as opposed to, if you like, a colour-driven one, may well influence the way in which some of these people think towards females. So, for example, Albanians tend as a group to have particular attitudes to women, and I'm stereotyping here, but it's no surprise, therefore, that Albanians are very, very prolific in terms of trafficking of women across Europe. So,
and they were on this list as, I think, the number one nationality.
They were indeed. And of course, what is interesting, and if I may take this story a little bit further, is, of course, at one time, most of the people coming into the country in the rubber boats were, in fact, Albanians.
Yeah.
But since they've now got their foot soldiers in to control the entire cocaine trade for the United Kingdom, with the exception of Merseyside, the Albanian, if you like, entrepreneurial criminals have stopped coming to this country. I know I've gone off down a rabbit hole, but the issue on it is that we will have this disproportionality because the culture of certain elements who come recently to the UK does not fit in with the rump value here. So you will find, for example, that people who are in this country who have Hindu, Sikh, West Indian extraction, this figure does not represent them because the values that they have are the more traditional ones towards women in this country. Whereas in other parts of the world, women are not treated the same. And we can see in Afghanistan that the attitude towards women in Afghanistan is quite appalling. So we should not be surprised that if we've got disproportionate numbers of Afghanistan young men coming into the country, they will be involved disproportionately in sexual offences. And that's not to say all people from Afghanistan are a problem, because having worked for 2 years there alongside a lot of brave Afghan soldiers and police, I can say they are decent, honourable people. But the culture comes from some parts of the world.
And that, of course, is... I was just going to... Go on, Kevin, sorry.
Why aren't we deporting these people who have committed criminal
100%.
offences who are subject to potential deportation?
But isn't this the same problem that there is something in the Venn diagram here about the grooming gangs of people's sensitivities, you know, scared to talk about this. Everything we're discussing now, you'd never hear Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer say any of this at a press conference. They wouldn't even go there. And that's been the problem, isn't it? It's, you know, people don't want to say what's right in front of them because they think they'll be accused of something nefarious, or it makes them a racist, or it means that they're, you know, an unkind or not a nice person. So instead they keep quiet, despite the fact that everybody else can see quite clearly, look, it's not about every person from that group of countries, but there is an underlying theme here, and some areas culturally are way, way back to where we are, and that's why we have some of these problems. But you just don't hear anybody say it.
Well, you're right. And if we talk specifically about the child rape gangs that we've seen so much of in over 30 British cities at the moment, it will never be addressed until we focus on the intelligence that we have. And the intelligence tells us that certain elements of Pakistani males who come from the Mirpur, Kashmir region of Pakistan are disproportionately involved in this particular type of offending. So until we look at that, we can't look at the cultural and social reasons that's causing that to happen, because not all Pakistanis, by a long chalk, are involved in that activity. But if you will not actually address the nub of the problem, you will not be able to work with that group to deal with it. But the other issue on that is, part of the reason why this has happened is because the police have failed, as have the social services, to deal with this issue properly, because they're concerned about being accused of Islamophobia or of racism. So the net result of it is they'd far rather leave little girls, who are generally looked after children from social care, and they're there quite often because they've been a problem in the past, leave them to their fate because it's the easiest route to go.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to say here is this is more a cultural issue rather than a colour issue, and people will tend to associate colour with that. So there are certain groups within UK society who are as white as I am, who are also involved in grooming activity. So it's not a race issue, it's a cultural one.
Yeah. It's a fair point. Kevin, thank you. Kevin Hurley, former Detective Chief Superintendent. That crime league table does indeed put Albanians as the nationality most likely to be arrested, followed by Afghans, Iraqis, Algerians, Moroccans and Somalians. Aren't we all grown up enough now to know that quite clearly that doesn't mean that anyone from those countries or those places, culturally or otherwise, is going to be involved in attacking women or any other crime for that matter? You don't need a PhD in international politics to be able to work that, or indeed in demography. You could just literally use your common sense. But for some reason, the likes of Keir Starmer, and I think it was echoed a bit in that press conference earlier when he talked about the jumping on the far-right bandwagon, and elsewhere, we've seen this same story play out time and time again. And it's just interesting, this has come on the back of the grooming gang story being kind of reignited in the minds of the British public and elsewhere, because it does give us a very real, horrifying, I mean, really the word horrifying in its full appropriate use of the word, horrifying insight into the kind of twisted thinking, mostly of the left, but though, and I'm not making a political point on that, that's just factually the case, mostly of the left, or those whose paymasters are of the left. So council workers who were working for the local authority, who were told, you know, don't report that, don't mention that bit, and if you do mention it, we'll send you on a diversity awareness course for pointing out a commonality that any copper worth their salt would point out. First thing you look for, we've got all these cases, what's the common link? Right, OK, there's the common link, follow that link. And nobody did, nobody wanted to talk about it. People were told to shut up, people lost their jobs, people were, as I mentioned, threatened with having to go on a race awareness course to sort them out of their badness. We'll get that demon out of you. Well, if it kills us. This is how it worked. And these guys were getting away with it because nobody would point out the elephant in the room. And culturally, there are issues. And clearly, the white trash, as these men saw these young girls, was there for all to see. It didn't take a load of detective work. It was in plain sight. This was race-hating. Dan Hodges mentioned it in that way earlier on. Race-hating, the same area where people got very animated over Black Lives Matter, over Windrush, and other scandals as well, and often correctly so. But not this one. This one just didn't seem to, for some reason, to just fire up those same voices in the same way. I mean, Keir Starmer got down on one knee after Matey was killed by a copper in the United States. He literally got down on one knee and then understood why people were rioting in the streets. We've got to understand what's behind this. I haven't seen him on one knee for this, for the thousands of girls that were victims. Just haven't seen that. Maybe there's a picture I've missed and somebody can email it to me. perhaps I think I might be waiting a long time, sadly. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more calls from you in a few moments. We started off with the question, does Reform UK even need Elon Musk? I don't think they do, actually. I can see how it would have been handy, but I think, and it may come back, the relationship might rekindle, I don't know. I'm sure as we speak, Mr. Candy and others are making phone calls, desperately trying to find out what the heck's going on. I mean, remember, Musk has not said he doesn't support Reform UK. He just made the remark about Nigel Farage and then suggested Rupert Lowe should be, who's another Reform MP, should be the candidate. But I wonder whether they will always be at the behest, almost, of Elon. You're always going to have these moments. What does Elon think? What's he going to tweet about this? Because he don't care. You know, the guy's a bit of a nut job, and he's a talented nut job, and I get that. And people with great talents are often, you know, slightly flawed neurologically, and that's not a criticism, that's just a basic observation. Brilliant people often come from the world of flawed thinking elsewhere. That's Musk, but Reform will have that all the time. He'll always be there. Just as they think they're making headway, you can imagine him tweeting something, go, oh, for God's sake, what have you done that for, Elon? We've just established X, Y, Z, and now you've gone and said that. I think they can survive perfectly fine without him. Thoughts from you on that? Plus, on a lighter note, the Voice of Doom, Day 7. Day 7 is our longest rollover of the Voice of Doom. Will it go today? Find out next.
We are going to see most trains cancelled. There will be a skeleton service, and certainly Manchester to London, that's likely to be an hourly train instead of 3 trains an hour. So they will be a little bit crowded, and similar thing, Birmingham and Crewe and Preston with 1 train an hour, and then the occasional train from Glasgow as well, but they're only going to be running between about 8 in the morning and 5 or 6 in the evening.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
You ready for the voice of doom? It's the political mystery voice. It's gone on for this is the 7th day. Nobody's got this. It's the longest we've ever had one of these go on for. Very simple. Just try and identify the voice. Do not phone in. There is no prize. Here's the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? You can message 87222 if you want to have a crack at it. Have another listen.
I believe that so strongly.
If we get the right answer inside about the next 12 or 13 minutes, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over again till tomorrow. Here it is again.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? 87222. Hopefully we get a right answer, and we'll tell you when we do. Details coming next. Back to the phones. Nigel is in Bury St Edmunds. What's going on, Nigel? Afternoon to you.
Oh, hi, Ian. Yeah, I'm very well. Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Happy New Year, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Happy New Year.
And all that.
Yeah, Ian, I've been following this story for a while now, and I see politicians and everybody twiddling their thumbs and worrying about an inquiry. And yes, I'd like to see an inquiry, but more than anything else, I think like most citizens of this country, we want to see this stopped. And I don't see anything out there at the moment that's going to stop this going on. We hear about a task force, but do we really believe something's going on? What I would suggest is there should be a well-publicised national telephone hotline for victims, parents, carers, for when they see or they suspect something, that they telephone this one line. Everything is cross-referenced, is headed up by a very senior police person, and let's put these people behind bars, nail them, jail them, deport them if necessary, but whatever. But let's stop this. Let's stop this now and make it really difficult for people to do this.
That's how it should be, right? And many people in those areas, I guess, might well argue, Nigel, that they tried to report it, but nothing happened.
No, so we'd have a hotline, and everything has to be followed up. You know, all the calls have to be followed up. That has to be what do you call monitored, or I don't know what's the word for it, when somebody actually double checks everything.
Like an audit.
Everything has to be audited.
Yeah.
You know, you get the car registration numbers, you can cross-reference it, so you could get where names come up. A bit like the thing with the Jimmy Savile, when they say you publicise it, people come forward. If it was easy and people knew that something was going to happen about it, I mean, a lot of it, I've heard parents of these people worried about their children being taken away. And, well, you know, let's have one number where everybody can go. It's well publicised on TV, where everybody can put their information there so it can all be cross-referenced, and let's get these people and put them behind bars.
There it is. Fair point. Listen, Nigel, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's go to Peter in Oxfordshire. What do you got, Peter? Hi.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, good to speak to you again.
You too.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year.
This scandal, this rape gang scandal, I think it's the biggest in my lifetime. And when we think in terms of, the post office scandal and the infected blood scandal, it's up there with those.
Yeah.
And, I heard that the J inquiry, somebody said from them today, that people shouldn't be making it political. Well, it is political. It's... It's a decision that has to be made, and we're very fortunate, really, the fact that Musk has put it back on the agenda, because it's been largely ignored.
Yeah. Why do you think it was that the Conservatives, bearing in mind, I mean, look, Jess Phillips, the minister that said there won't be a specific inquiry into Oldham, well, she hasn't said there won't be, she said it's for Oldham Council to do it, which is the same line that the Conservatives took. Why do you think the Conservatives, Peter, were, when we look back on it now, breathtakingly quiet on this?
I think that they're as reluctant to get involved in this as the Labour Party, in a way. I don't know why, because talking about the children is the main issue.
Sure.
That's what should happen, and a national inquiry should concentrate on this particular issue. You remember in the last Jay inquiry, it was lumped together with a whole lot of other issues, including abuse in the church and in education and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And apparently Maggie Oliver said today to Julia that they only spent 10 days on this, and most of the time they spent listening only to the chief constables and not to her. She wasn't allowed to give evidence. And yet, I mean, this woman is an absolute star. I mean, like...
Well, quite. Yes, I mean, she would have been...
He got a knighthood. She should be getting something like that.
Well, you'd think so.
For 12 years on this.
But there were also, you know, even some of the girls that tried to report it. I mean, I know it was never straightforward, because the victims were terrified of reporting it because they were threatened literally with death, and some sadly were killed during all of this. So, but there were some that did speak out. You know, we spoke to one girl last week on this point. I mean, those people should have been at an inquiry talking.
But it's absolutely egregious, Ian. And you know, if we can't deal with this matter, I mean, this is one of the most serious offences against our country, in a way. I mean, the girls of our country.
Yeah.
If we can't deal with this, how are we going to do anything about the Batley school teacher?
Correct.
Or the young boy who scuffed the Koran?
Yep. Indeed, all of that. Listen, I've got to move, Peter, but that's been a brilliant call. Thank you. Great words and wisdom from Peter in Oxfordshire. More of that from you in a few moments. 0344 499 1000. Paul says, it occurs to me that Starmer has no incentive to improve police forces, as any move towards restoring law and order, justice and fairness in our society is against his and the Labour Party's interest. He will promise reform but fail completely on purpose. Mr. Hurley explained what is going on very well. Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll continue with a lot of comment from you. If you want to put a voice note in as well, 87222 to send us a voice note and bypass the queues. We'll take more calls, more messages on the way. Hopefully we get a winner on the Voice of Doom. Have a listen to the voice again.
I believe that so strongly.
Who's that then? 87222 if you think you might know. There is no prize, do not phone in. If we get a right answer, we will reveal all after the news at 3 o'clock. If we don't, here's what happens. It rolls over. It'll be day 8. We've never had a Voice of Doom roll over for so long. We're in new territory here. This is dramatic stuff, kids. Find out more in a few moments' time. This is Talk. Let's get the headlines at 3 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock, that'll be. Welcome to 2025. The home of common sense continues onwards and, as you would expect, upwards. Lots to go from here as well. We are talking Elon Musk and that withdrawing of support for Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. Mr. Musk says Nigel doesn't have what it takes. Where the heck did that come from? Is that really just about a man in jail, or was there something more to this? And do Reform even need Elon Musk? I mean, the Wonga would have been handy, but I can see problems in the road with this man lurking in the wings and spouting out a tweet every 2 seconds. More comment from you on that one. Also, the Prime Minister says NHS reform in England is the cornerstone of rebuilding Britain. He's unveiled plans to add 2 million extra appointments by next year to tackle waiting lists. Remember, there are 7.5 million people on NHS waiting lists at the moment. We'll talk about that in a couple of moments. And e-scooter collisions have trebled in 3 years, prompting urgent calls for changes in the law. That's another area of life you think would be a bit of a no-brainer. But apparently not. These people are going absolutely barking mad on these two-wheeled horror shows all over the place. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. This from Chrissy, who's in Spain, says Elon Musk may be dollar rich, but he's wisdom poor. Great show, says Chrissy. Thank you. That's the only bit of your tweet or message that came out, Chrissy. But thank you for the nice comment. Yeah, I do think that part of the flaw of Musk is that he will do stuff like this and just tweet kind of random stuff, and people, for whatever reason, go, he's great, isn't he, Elon? Yeah, he's a free speech warrior. Well, he might be. It doesn't mean that everything else about you is good. It doesn't mean you're always right. It doesn't mean to say that you're the best barometer of what is appropriate or correct in a certain situation. It means he's good at flogging cars or finance, which I think is the backbone of the industry. And he's, going to be more powerful than he was before, which would be great for his business. But is he good at politics? I'm not so sure. Let's go to the voice of doom. So we had, very simply, a voice. OK, it's essentially the political mystery voice that we do every day about this time. This one's gone on for 6 days. This is day 7. Here's the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? These are some of the wrong answers. John Major, no. Rory Stewart, no. Was it Tobias Elwood? No. Douglas Murray, definitely not. Neil Hamilton, no. Prince Harry, no. David Lammy, no. Enoch Powell, no. In fact, we still do not have a right answer. If we get one in the next 10 seconds, Barry Gardner, somebody said here, no. A couple of people have said Barry Gardner is not the right answer. No, the lines are closed. We haven't got, I'm told the official arbiters have closed the lines on this. Anyone that tries to take part now will be reported to Ofcom for competition-based offences. So just there's your warning. It means it rolls over and it's back tomorrow on the programme. Now, Keir Starmer reckons he's got this one about right. He's going to fight for the NHS day and night, promising millions of extra appointments to cut waiting times to 18 weeks by the next general election. The PM has unveiled plans to reduce hospital backlogs and remove patients from waiting lists, calling reform of the health system the cornerstone of rebuilding Britain. With me is Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust chairman, a man who regularly helps us out on these kind of stories. Roy, good afternoon to you. It's bold. It all sounds reasonable. Nobody is disagreeing with great aspiration, but can it be done?
Well, Ian, good afternoon. A lot of it is being done. And really, I don't think the Prime Minister announced anything that was very new, or anything that was new, really, or anything the NHS wasn't doing. It's taken the number of hubs that he was talking about, which was originally a Conservative government idea, They've taken those from 79 to 140 or 180, I think it is now. So the investment is going into the hubs. They are important for two reasons. The diagnostic hubs can focus on seeing whether or not people need further treatment as inpatient care or nothing, and that's the important one. The ones that need nothing can come off the list. And of course, they do what in the NHS is called cold surgery. That means that they are ring-fenced and they only deal with waiting list customers, and they don't get disturbed by emergencies or, a smack on the motorway and they have to operate on 6 people. So, sure. I mean, they're a good idea and they work. He's talking about his deal with the private sector. Well, there's been a deal with the private sector, I don't know, going back to 2014. They can't do very much. They've only got 8,000 beds. Most of them don't have ITUs. So if something goes wrong in an operation, they have to transfer people back to the NHS. And last year there was about 6,000 people who were transferred, most of them over 65. So, you can only kind of give them the simple stuff to do, which takes the revenues away from the NHS. And that's what, gets people excited when they say that the money going into the private sector just goes in profits and doesn't come back to the NHS. Apart from that, really, there was nothing really that was very new in it. And you have to wonder, why he dragged everybody down to Surrey to end up getting beaten up, really, by the press, who wanted to know about Elon Musk and Farage.
Yes, yeah. He sort of slightly hijacked there, didn't he, really? But I guess he should have known that does go with the territory of asking the, journalists, have you got any questions? Yeah, OK, we love the NHS idea, but let's talk about Musk, and you're absolutely right.
I must say, I felt really sorry for the parade of nurses and doctors who were sort of stage managed behind him, who started with a cheery good morning smile and ended up with a sort of grimace. And
why are we sitting here?
What am I doing here? Yeah,
absolutely. One of the big arguments against one of the points that I see raised quite a lot, Roy, from clinicians and others that have worked around the NHS is that we simply don't have the staff. I mean, that seems to be the biggest sticking point, no matter how bold an initiative is. And, you rightly said, I mean, the last government, diagnostic centres and the like, these had already been up and running. They might be putting their foot on the gas a little bit on this one, and I'm sure West Streeting is meaning well, but much of it was already in place. But without the clinical staff, without the nurses, doctors, oncologists and people who can scan and use machines, then it counts for nothing.
Well, you're right, Ian, you put your finger right on it. It's capacity, and we don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity in beds, we don't have the capacity in staff, we don't have the capacity in kit and all the rest of it. And the reason for that goes back a long way. It goes back to the world banking crisis in 2008. After that, George Osborne, of course, was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we had nearly 10 years of austerity funding. The NHS got under 2% a year for nearly 10 years. So we didn't buy enough kit, didn't innovate enough, didn't train enough, didn't refurbish enough. I mean, there's a 20 billion backlog of NHS maintenance now waiting to be sorted out. And then, of course, came COVID. We forget we went into COVID with about 4.5 million people on the waiting list and about 40,000 vacancies in nursing. We came out of COVID. I mean, whatever happened in COVID, they just threw money at it. But now we've come out the other side, the chickens are coming home to roost, and the NHS is struggling with a huge waiting list. The difficulty is this: about 300,000 people join the NHS waiting list every month, and about 300,000 people get treated in the NHS every month. So you've got to, somehow or other, you've either got to stop people getting sick in the first place, or you've got to treat them quicker. Now, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. If we want to get back to the 95% of people waiting 18 months, which is Starmer's target, you can have 3 million people on the waiting list as a kind of balancing fund. The people in and the people out, and you can keep it around 3 million, and you can churn it in the target time. So that means really we've got about 4 million people that have got to come off the waiting list before we can get down to that target. Now, the NHS has done quite well, actually. I don't know why they haven't made more of it, but they've got rid of nearly all the long waiters and most of the 2-year waiters. Unfortunately, now, of course, everything's clogged up with the flu and Nova virus and all the rest of it. But given a clear run, I don't see any reason really why they shouldn't get pretty near the target. But they need a clear run, and it needs money. It's not just, paying staff. It's the overheads, the lights, the prosthesis, the gas, and, all the consumables as well cost a lot of money. So it's not cheap, but I think it could be done.
Well, we'll watch with interest. Time will deliver that answer, Roy, of course. Thank you, as ever, for being on with us. Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust chairman on that one. Unless you've got the staff or the scanning machines, then this comes to nothing, really. You can have every great intent. We ain't got enough people working in the NHS. What are your stories surrounding that? My partner had a scan on Saturday afternoon at 5:30, this weekend just gone. And that would never, that's not happened because of West Streeting. I think it was, she had a previous appointment, oddly, on a Sunday afternoon at about 4:30. So that particular clinic had obviously began, I don't know when it started functioning at the weekend, but I'm pretty sure a couple of years back it wouldn't have been functioning at the weekend, but in the last year at least, it has been. Now, that won't be the same for every clinic. I don't know whether you get an oncology appointment on a Saturday or a Sunday, and one of the reasons for that would be there's not enough oncologists, you'd have to assume. So there's certain things you can do at the weekend and other things that would be impossible. If you're short of staff, you can't have somebody you don't get, matey down the road to come and step in because the oncologist is having a day off. We're talking about highly qualified people here. I don't know how they solve that part of this kind of weird jigsaw puzzle, but like so many things in this country, they've had so much notice of it. It's not like this has just crept up on us. I know COVID was the biggest scupperer of all of this, and of course politicians have themselves to blame for that one, Keir Starmer in particular, because he wanted to go further and deeper when it came to lockdown. I was having a conversation with a mate yesterday about lockdown, just about how nonsense it was. He was in the United States at the time. He was working in Chicago, and he said, actually, it was all right in Chicago, because there are a lot of sort of statewide regulations as opposed to nationwide ones. The kids went to school. They had slightly fewer hours. I think they sort of did half day or something like that, but they still went to school. That wasn't closed down, and it seemed to be a bit more of a sensible approach. And we went for the full package, didn't we? We went for all the add-ons that didn't have to happen. And now we're paying a bit of a price for many, many reasons. The NHS is one of the more prominent ones, of course. Let's go to Larry, who's in Rainford, on NHS reforms. What have you got for us, Larry? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. I look back to the 1970s when I qualified as a radiographer.
Yep.
No patients were turned away. We x-rayed every patient who came to casualty. Mm-hmm. If somebody was seen at the GP, a phone call, can I send them along, and we'd get it done.
Yeah.
But there are too many Mr. Lillys in the world, and there certainly were when he was around, who had no idea of medical conditions, had no experience. They were pen pushers. That's what he was.
How does that put us? I mean, look, people will always argue about, pen pushers and too much bureaucracy, but how did that add to the problem, as it were?
It means that people who come on or go to the GP or whatever, they can be referred to clinicians, not through pen pushers. There's too many too many administrators who haven't been through a hospital.
Yeah, I agree with that. But you do need some administrators, right?
Oh, yeah, but they're a last resort.
Yeah.
And they can go on a computer now and organise everything. But we need to have more clinical people to be in charge of hospital.
And that's a fair point. Listen, Larry, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your work that you did as well in the NHS. This from Matt in Newcastle. Back to our main subject. Elon Musk is just saying what Ben Habib has been pointing out for months about Reform's leadership. They have even banned him from appearing in front of Reform audiences. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he's not, you know, he stood for an MP, didn't quite make it. Ben's voice is incredibly fluent and powerful. And I think he's much loved by the Reform base, but clearly couldn't have been made, couldn't have continued as the deputy leader of the party once they got 5 MPs in there. So I understand what happened there, but obviously behind the scenes there's been a bit of a falling out. I think that's fair to say. If you didn't have Nigel Farage running Reform, who's a one-man electioneering machine. I mean, Boris Johnson was a good electioneering machine. He was a shocking prime minister, but he knew how to do that knocking on door thing. Standing up, giving spontaneous speeches, sometimes making you chuckle, certainly making you think. And we've got Farage, who can do that, but better. Disagree with the bloke. I mean, you might pathologically hate Nigel Farage and all that he stands for. But no one's going to say he's not a good communicator. I was watching him on the Koonsberg thing yesterday, and he's just very, very good. And he's consistently good. He's very rarely flawed by a question. And I can't imagine who, by the way, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's any serious talk within Reform to replace their leader because Elon Musk sent a tweet. But if you did replace him, as I think Matt in Newcastle and maybe others would like to, who would you put there? Who would you put there that could tick all of those boxes? Remember when Nigel Farage nearly didn't stand at the election? Before July, he said, I'm not going to stand, I'm going to go off to America and work with Donald Trump. And Richard Tice had to kind of very quickly step up to the plate. Richard is one of the most decent and noble and honest men I know in this area of life, in politics. He's a thoroughly nice bloke, and he has a passionate and qualified view on what he sees is wrong with the system, the world. All of that he shares with Nigel. I think he's a great communicator as well. But I think, Richard was the first to say, ideally, he wanted Nigel Farage at the helm of it. And then, of course, there was a change around, for lots of reasons, I'm sure, of heart from Mr Farage, and he came back. But I don't know who you'd get to tick all those same boxes. Again, I have to say this, even if you cannot stand the guy, you can't fail to agree that as an orator, as a communicator, the guy is almost unrivaled. There are few people in politics, forget just the Reform Party, across the whole board, that can match him on that one. Every day of the week, he'd knock your pants off in a debate, because that's how he works. 0344 499 1000.
Yes, we are going to see most trains cancelled. There will be a skeleton service, and certainly Manchester to London, that's likely to be an hourly train instead of 3 trains an hour. So they will be a little bit crowded, and similar thing, Birmingham and Crewe and Preston with 1 train an hour, and then the occasional train from Glasgow as well, but they're only going to be running between about 8 in the morning and 5 or 6 in the evening.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This comes from Sandy, who says two-tier free gear never here is an absolute disgrace. He's insinuating that Maggie Oliver is jumping on the bandwagon and is right-wing. She's worked her socks off for these poor girls. Starmer should be ashamed of himself and definitely resign. I'm ashamed that he's my Prime Minister. It's a very good point, because when he made that comment about people jumping on a right-wing bandwagon, I don't know why he needed to go there, bearing in mind it was exactly that kind of thinking that got us here in the first place, that people were, you know, sensitive to race issues and dividing it up, so we better not say too much, you know, because, you know, we might be in trouble. Just precisely that problem. I mean, when he looks at all the... You know, last week I had Maggie Oliver on the programme with me. I think she was on with Julia as well today. We also had Samantha, who's a big speaker on this stuff and a victim herself. Both of these women spoke incredibly fluently and effortlessly, and with real passion and grim experience from 2 different sides on the issue. So to write those people off, particularly a victim, as suggesting, well, you're just jumping on a bandwagon because you dare to call for an inquiry. Man alive. Ben's in Guildford on Musk and Reform. What's going on, Ben? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you, Ian. Am I audible?
Audible as you like, yeah. Sounding great.
Excellent. You had a call earlier with somebody who was he mentioned Josh Hurley, to Senator John Kennedy and Ted Cruz.
Yes.
And I thought, those are the ones that are just shown on YouTube as repeats. I've actually sat in the tent. It's not that exciting. I spent 2 days there and very few arguments got had.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why Musk is interfering in British politics is the same reason I wrote an article, which is due to go out, which America suffered heavily under the Biden-Harris administration, heavily, more than we have in any way. You know, they opened the borders, they inflated the cost of living to beyond something that we can even conceive right now. And I think Musk's interest in British politics is simply that America, and this is my article, America is the only experiment at the moment of capitalism and free markets that's really being attempted. And that's great, but they've gone through the 4 years of a socialist and identity politics-based administration of Biden that prioritised net zero targets and woke issues and put them in so much debt that their economy, really, people were struggling whether to eat or buy medicine, and these were just everyday people. You wouldn't get that in England here. Yeah. And I think he's coming from a point of nipping it in the bud before it gets too bad. And he may also be thinking, he's one of the most intelligent men on the planet. He's not a fool. He's not going to make a politician, but he does understand politics. And I think part of what he's doing may also be to get Starmer to kind of rear back on his socialist policies.
So do you think he cares for the UK?
Yes. absolutely. And what he cares most about is ending wokeism, because he lost a son to it. And I'm with him on that as well. And I think he sees the UK going into 4 years of socialist woke hell, and America has just come out of it. Now, one thing, Farage, I don't think he should have any say on who runs the Reform Party. He can converse with them all, but that's fine. Ben Habib could be someone who could run it. Farage is a great speaker, but he needs good people behind him.
Yeah.
But you can't recreate a Donald Trump, and you can't recreate his acolytes. It's just not possible. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
I think you're right, and you're absolutely spot on. I look on mesmerised at those kind of Ted Cruz moments when they're cross-questioning somebody on, Israel policies on campus. You know what I'm talking about here, Ben, and those kind of moments, and they're like, wow, I need more than popcorn to watch this. These guys are brilliant. And they're always dressed so beautifully well, aren't they? They wear a suit like no one else can, these fellas. But you're absolutely right. Those moments are few and far between. They don't happen every day, and they don't happen every month.
Take a day in Congress to get one of those moments.
Yeah.
So you sit the rest of the time bored. It's not all sensational out there.
Spot on. Ben, thank you very much indeed for that. Back to the NHS. Stephen says, my daughter has had Crohn's disease for 15 years, from the age of 17. A couple of years ago, she needed part of her gut removing. Her surgeon said if she were a dog and her surgeon a vet, they would operate tomorrow. However, the NHS doesn't allow the surgeon to decide the operation list. The administrators have to do all of that and then tell people the surgeon when they can operate. Happened a couple of weeks ago, of more pain later. Get the doctors back in charge, administrators out of the way, says Stephen in Bromsgrove. And of course, the reason the administrators found themselves in perhaps with more power and prominence than one would like is because the argument went the other way, that you've got the medics in charge, and they're great medics and great surgeons and fantastic at clinical procedures and matters, but they can't run a whelk stall. So the whole thing needed a bit of a business brain in there to sort it out. So maybe is it somewhere in the middle? Steve, I hope everything goes well with your daughter. Nobody should be waiting when they have such, in the 21st century, in the United Kingdom, should be waiting for any length of time for what it clearly, and Crohn's is an incredibly debilitating, aggravating disease to suffer from. And those that have it and live with it are incredible in their just their ability to carry on some days of the week. So you want to think that by now, in our journey as the country that invented this great thing apparently called the NHS back in the 40s, we'd be doing this stuff on an hourly basis. But for many reasons, and this is what the government are trying to deal with, we ain't. We're not getting anywhere near it. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more from you in a few moments. We'll also talk e-scooters. They're back on those pesky old two-wheel beasts, back on the agenda as well. All of that's on the way. It's 3:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. It's just coming up on 25 to 4. That's the one. We understand that Justin Trudeau may well resign during the next 10 or 15 minutes. If that is the case, we'll bring that to you here live on the programme. Stand by. And a couple more comments coming in from you as well. This one in from Paul. It occurs to me Starmer has... I think I read that one from Paul. Benedict, sorry. Afternoon, Ian. I think Farage has handled this situation really rather well. Reform is the new Brexit movement. It's a people's movement, but it must be credible. We need a sensible party, one that's willing to call a spade, but not in utter theatrics of the likes of Robinson and Musk. Farage isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I think when push comes to shove at the next general election, if things trend the same way, many people who aren't politically active would be willing to tick the reform box with their eyes closed like they did for Boris. I think there is something absolutely in that. Nice one, Benedict. Thank you. Now, e-scooter collisions have trebled in 3 years, prompting urgent calls for new law changes. In total, 29 people died between 2020 and 2023 in 4,500 e-scooter collisions, which also caused over 4,800 injuries. 1,400 of those were classed as serious. Let's speak with Sarah Gayton, Street Access Campaign Coordinator with the National Federation of the Blind in the UK. And in a moment, Richard Gladman, Chief Examiner at I Am RoadSmart, the largest independent road safety charity. Sarah, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I mean, it is one of those issues, isn't it, as we've spoken before, that, you know, when it comes to scooters and bikes and, I don't know, hire bikes littered all over pavements and goodness knows what, just that point of view from a blind perspective, I mean, this is nightmare territory.
Absolutely, and that's why we've put so much effort into actually going out to look at the problem, to document the problem and actually keep the pressure on to keep these e-scooters totally illegal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems that they're becoming more legal, if that makes sense.
They're totally illegal. Derbyshire, the Police Crime Commissioner, has actually got the police force to act and seize on... When they see one, they actually stop and seize them, and they've taken hundreds off the street so far because of the complaints that they were getting and how it's affecting people, pedestrians, you know. So they are taking action, and they can take them off the street. There's no doubt about that.
The hire schemes are different from individuals owning them, of course, but there is a sense that local authorities, maybe the police, are sort of turning a bit of a blind eye to this.
Well, I think I'd sort of agree with you on the hire schemes because a lot of the schemes have already shut down. I've been to Birmingham recently and I've found them strewn on the pavement, knocked over, trip hazards. Yep. I still saw people riding them on the pavement. They're not safe still, and it shows that even with the regulation, you cannot enforce it properly. So to us, again, we're calling for the actual remainder of the trials to be shut down as well.
I was about to say, you know, where does this go next? Are people listening to you in government? Have you got, you know, MPs and the right people on side?
I think the fact that it wasn't in the King's speech this year, or well, last year now, was quite positive for us. Yeah. And we will start to ramp it up and to keep providing the evidence, because the figures you just quoted on the serious injuries and the injuries, it's the tip of the iceberg, because I'm still finding lots of them on Facebook that will never make the police records. And one lady, again up in Derby, she used her son's e-scooter, and the injury she got from her leg, it was, I think, 4 or 5 operations. She nearly lost the leg, she nearly died. Simply jumping on one and knocked herself up on a curb. They're inherently dangerous. They're inherently unsafe, and you know they cannot be legalised, because it doesn't matter what you do, you won't take that inherent danger away from them.
And the speed as well that some of these things go at is utterly remarkable. It's not surprising. I mean, 29 people dying over a 3-year period, as I mentioned there. That's 29 people that would still be alive if these things didn't even exist. 4,500 collisions. I mean, serious injuries. I mean, the list goes on. This is clearly a very, certainly at the moment, a very dangerous form of transport, a very dangerous thing to exist on our streets.
Absolutely, and I witnessed them going up in Tamworth. I've seen them from the high street when it's market days, when I do a different job there, and it's terrifying because the people riding in them, there are a lot of young people on them, and they whiz in and out of people, and they haven't got a clue how dangerous it is, to old people, to blind people, to visually impaired people, to anybody, to other children that are actually just walking up and down the high street. So if they did become legalised, what you're seeing now and witnessing now and the problems you're witnessing will just expand, because even at the 15.5 miles per hour, having still serious problems, serious injuries and people being killed, because there has been a number of people killed through the trials, through the legal dispute. So, yes, the really high speeds are extremely dangerous, but even at slower speeds,
sure,
they're not safe, Ian. So it doesn't matter what people try and say, you will not change our mind on this issue.
There it is. Listen, great to have you on with us again, Sarah. Thank you. Sarah Gayton, Street Access Campaign Coordinator with the National Federation of the Blind in the UK. Let's speak with Richard Gladman, Chief Examiner at I Am Road Smart. Richard, good afternoon to you. When I first spoke to your organisation some years ago, these things didn't even exist. So it shows how times change. Now they're here. They're probably here to stay with respect to what Sarah said. But something needs controlling. Is that fair?
Absolutely, Ian. Good afternoon to you. But Sarah makes some really, really good points there. These things were never designed to interact with pedestrians on the pavement.
Yeah.
Something doing 15 miles an hour on the pavement, weaving in and out of pedestrians, is always going to be a danger to everybody. And, to think of dealing with that when you're blind, it just beggars belief that these things are interacting.
Indeed.
However, we've got ourselves to where we are with the trials. The trials have a better form of enforcement. There has to be an insurance policy in place, and at least the machines are regulated in some way. The ones that we see that are flitting around with a youngster jumping on them, there's absolutely no, there's no standardisation of them. They were essentially a toy that were bought to play with in your back garden, and they're now interacting on the roads.
And what's the line on this with governments or local authorities, as far as we know, Richard? I mean, I made the point to Sarah that it's almost as if someone somewhere has gone, look, these things are here to stay. I mean, once in a while you hear the police pulling somebody over, confiscating their scooter, but are authorities turning a blind eye to this?
It's difficult to say, Ian, but obviously with the trials being run officially, we send out a little bit of a mixed message, because we're saying to youngsters, these things are not permitted on the road, they're not legal, but then they see everybody else flying around on the trial ones.
Yep.
Really what we need to do is get to the end of a trial, assess the information, and then move forward with proper legislation on these things. If they are here to stay, then let's legislate them into the traffic structure correctly. And that definitely isn't going to involve them being on the pavements.
Indeed. Richard, thank you for your time. Richard Gladman, Chief Examiner at I Am Road Smart. I'm sure if you've had an altercation with an e-scooter, you know only too well the dangers of these things. It does seem extraordinary. You'd put this sort of 10, 15 mile an hour bit of kit to mooch around on roads. I mean, you see people, there's no safety wear being worn. That bit I find a bit weird, that you could go that fast on something. You wouldn't dream of doing that on a motorbike or a moped even. But these things are pretty nifty when it comes to gathering a bit of speed. You throw in a pedestrian into that equation. You don't need to be a genius in road safety to realise where the problem is. 0344 499 1000. We are hearing that Justin Trudeau is about to give a news conference, apparently with the explicit reason that he's going to resign. That's the Prime Minister of Canada, of course. He's often been in the headlines, although it's gone quiet over there for the last few months. Maybe he's been navel-gazing, wondering what to do. Today, it seems, will be the conclusion. We'll bring that to you live. When it happens, could be in the next 5 or 10 minutes, right here on Talk.
he's sitting there, and what's being done about it? Nothing. I mean,
well, that's not
the spurious reason that he was
the
put
reason,
in for.
Yeah, but the reason, Errol,
his reason that he was put in because he didn't attend a court appearance. I mean, that's laughable, you know. I mean, that's totally laughable.
Well, I mean, the fact is that he had an opportunity to not be in contempt of court. He chose to be in contempt of court, and that's why he's in prison. So he's in there really because of his own actions, Errol.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk 4:45. Will Justin Trudeau resign? Does anybody care if Justin Trudeau... I think maybe a lot of people around the world have said, would it be a good thing if one of those types of, Jacinda Ardern down there in New Zealand has gone, thank goodness. That was a while back now. Trudeau sort of cut from the similar kind of group-thinking cloth as her. He'll be gone too. Well, we will watch with interest and see. Don't hold your breath, but apparently it could be in the next 10 minutes. We'll bring it to you live here on Talk if it does. Mark is in Lincolnshire. How you doing, Mark? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. How you doing, mate?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just the whole thing that's going on at the moment. I mean, so much. It just seems like every day there's so much to talk about. Yeah, I mean, basically a couple of things, really. First one being Farage, and obviously his little spat with Elon Musk. Yeah, I mean, Elon's actually quite correct in what he's saying. He isn't the man for the job, I don't believe. Anyway.
You don't think he is, no?
No, not at all. I mean, I voted Reform last time. I won't vote for him again purely because of Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
I don't think he sticks with his principles. I think he's far more interested in destroying the Tories than he is anything else. Should he actually get into power, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to have a different party other than the main two. Mm-hmm. However, he will leave the ECHR, that I have no doubt of. He will stop the boats, but he ain't going to fix the problem. People seem to think that he's capable of fixing the problem that we actually have in this country, and he's not. Because the problem that we have in this country all relates around mass deportations. Because unless you're going to actually deport probably 2 to 4 million people at this point, you can't fix it because there's no more money. You can't just magic money out of thin air, so you can't create the services required to actually satisfy the service demand in this country. So therefore, you're not going to fix anything. If he's talking about a net zero immigration policy, and that's all well and good, but as I say, it isn't going to fix anything because you're going to keep the numbers at the same level.
But there's never going to be a mass deportation policy, is there? I mean, did you mention the figure of 250,000 then?
Sorry, say again.
Did you mention 250,000 then, Mark, or did I imagine that?
What, to deport?
Yes.
No, I mentioned 2 to 4 million.
Oh, 2 to 4 million. I mean, that's never going to happen, is it? How do you deport 2 to 4 million people?
Well, for a start, there's an estimated... Well, there's 1 million illegal citizens in this country that we're aware of. Some figures, some studies show that that's actually as high as 1.5 million.
Yep.
You also have probably between 1 and 2 million people that are here on what could be considered kind of false pretenses. They're families of people that have come over.
Overstaying visas, that kind of thing?
Overstaying visas. They've come into the system and they've literally gone straight onto the benefits system. They're of no benefit to the nation. I mean, all it actually takes, really, because, in his recent interviews, he talks about, it's impossible, you can't do this. Well, actually, yes, you can do it. It's called having the guts to do it, is what it's actually called. This is what
but even Donald Trump isn't doing that, right?
No, he isn't. Well, nobody really knows what Donald Trump is going to do.
And that's true. And I'm not. By the way, I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do. I'm just aware that it would be the biggest story in human history since Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely it would. But the reality is, Ian, unless we can get a leader that's willing to make those kind of decisions, you're never going to get anywhere. And one of the biggest challenges any leader would face with this is the rabid left wing, and we all know this. Because the moment you start implementing some kind of policy along those lines, even if let's just say you were going to identify, spend like 2-3 years identifying absolutely everybody, this 1 to 1.5 million illegal citizens in the country that just shouldn't be here anyway. And obviously some of those are going to be criminals that are clogging up the prison system, etc. Even if you're spending a couple of years to identify them, then when you start deporting them, you know exactly what's going to happen. The left-wing media will be out in force, all the activist groups will be out in force, the lawyers will be out in force, which is why you need a leader that's quite willing to bring in the laws required to make it a possibility.
But you'd have to I mean, I'm just thinking logistically, I guess you'd have to say we're going to do this. It's going to be over maybe a 30-year period to do it, because you'd need a whole team of people to examine every case, wouldn't you? And they'd have to look at every case. And then you'd have to have interviews, and then you'd have the legal process of people going, well, actually, I am meant to be here. You've got that wrong. I've got a flipping visa. I work in the NHS. I'm meant to work here. Oh, the administrative kind of procedure would be massive.
Yeah, absolutely, it would be. But I don't think 30. I think 30 years is unrealistic. I think more like 10 years should be a doable thing. I think if you were willing to employ enough people with the not necessarily the same mindset, but that were actually willing to do it. Because obviously the other big problem is the civil service. That's a massive issue in this country. But there are things to do like that. I mean, you're talking, as I say, I mean, I voted Reform last time, Ian. I'm 50 years old. I've never joined a political party. I did last week, funny enough, and that was UKIP, that are far more genuine in what they wish to achieve, you know. And as I say, for me, it's such a shame, really, because, I mean, obviously, where I'm living, I mean, my MP is Richard Tice, and I actually don't mind Richard Tice. The party, and I think I've said this in the past, were a lot more authentic under him. Nigel Farage is very much the showman. You know, he does get bums on seats, I won't deny that.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I have to stick with my own principles.
Would you have Richard Tice back in as leader?
I certainly, I wouldn't mind that. I mean, I would prefer somebody, you know, Richard Tice and Ben Habib, some kind of combo like that.
Yeah.
I mean, Rupert Lowe, of the 5 that are there, if I'm totally honest, and I think if any Reform, you know, voter is listening to this, be honest with yourself. The only one of those 5 that's actually doing what they were supposed to be doing, the whole point of Reform, as far as most of us were concerned, is Rupert Lowe. He's the only one asking the questions in Parliament, writing the letters to the various departments, trying to get the information, trying to push on various things.
Almost on a daily basis.
Funny enough. Sorry?
Almost on a daily basis he's doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's also the only one that, however you want to take the, you know, much maligned Tommy Robinson, I mean, I don't particularly have a massive viewpoint on him anyway. I'm not overly keen. I don't hate him. I think he is persecuted to an extent. But he's the only one in Reform that's actually come out and said, you know, you can't ignore whatever you think about Tommy Robinson. You can't ignore the impact he has had, because he has had, you know, he was part of the whole system of people that were bringing the grooming gangs and all that stuff to light. And you can't deny that, whatever you think about the guy.
Yeah.
You know, that is a reality. And to completely, you know...
Some people argued, though, some people are... I mean, in fairness to other... I mean, there were other journalists that were out there doing it. I know Robinson was kind of doing it off his own back. I don't think at the time he worked for anybody in particular. But there were other... I think there was a guy from The Times whose name escapes me at the moment that was doing quite good work on this. Even Channel 4, can you believe it, Mark, did something on this as well, and a few others. But one of the problems, I heard somebody create the argument a couple of days ago that it was people like Tommy Robinson that created the idea that we weren't taking it serious, because there was the reason why people didn't take it serious was because people like Tommy Robinson were talking about it, because he was an untrustworthy witness, if you like.
But that's just a get out of jail free clause.
No, I agree. That's no reason. But unfortunately, given his past, given who he used to knock around with the EDL, who I think, by the way, I think they found 109 paedophiles in the EDL membership at one point as well. So, I mean, there's all of that going on. And, you know, this was a guy that, you know, has been arrested, imprisoned, football hooliganism, drugs, passport fraud, mortgage fraud, whatever you want to call it. All of these things. And this is a man trying to take on the cause of a racial injustice. We don't believe him. I can see why some people drew that conclusion.
Well, absolutely. And as I said to you, Ian, I can kind of take him or leave him.
Yeah. I'm kind of in. I mean, I'm sort of in that category. And I don't dispute, by the way, the work that he was trying to do, but I think he mucked it up a bit by, you know, almost corrupting an entire court case based around the very people he was purporting to try and save or expose, whatever way you look at it. I wonder then, if it wasn't Richard Tice, you said Richard Tice and Ben Habib marrying up together as a potential partnership, Mark. Do you seriously imagine that's going to happen? Could you imagine Nigel Farage standing down?
No, I don't. I mean, at the end of the day, he still controls the largest share of the party. They're not democratised in any way, really, at all. And that's a major issue as well. Yeah. I think, I think Ben Habib's gone. I think he's by the wayside now. I can't see him ever coming back.
Yeah.
As for Richard Tice, I think my only disappointment with him is that he is, you know, he's fallen under the spell of Farage, and he's quite happy to be Farage's yes man, really. I think that's true of Lee Anderson. And as for the other guy, McMurdoch, who's ever heard anything from him anyway?
Fair point.
You know, it just seems to me as well, you know, watching Twitter certainly since yesterday, you know, the Reform, as I referred to them on Twitter yesterday, the Reform sheep were absolutely amazing, because quite frankly, their attitude, they're no different to a Labour supporter, a Tory supporter, or anybody else who they've quite happily slagged off in the past.
Yeah.
You know, and up until a day ago, you know, I'll say this as politely as I can at this time of the day, but they would have been quite happy dropping their pants and bending over for a certain Mr. Musk. And yet, all of a sudden, amazingly, Musk comes out with one tweet, and now all of a sudden they're parroting the same lines that the MSM have been parroting.
There you go, you see. That's the funny world we found ourselves in the 21st century. Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. Great call from Mark in Lincolnshire. By the way, that news conference with Canadian PM Justin Trudeau due to start shortly outside his residence, Rideau Cottage in Ottawa. Reports say he's going to resign, but I think he'll stay on as Prime Minister even if he does resign. Jeremy Kyle said, look who's it, Jeremy Kyle is here.
I'd just like to say that I hate radio presenters who come on and they're boring and quiet, but I have been in bed with the flu for 3 whole weeks, okay? It was the worst Christmas, as you know, because you couldn't come and see my wife behind my back. And this is a desperate first attempt to try and be able to speak for 3 hours, okay? So I'm going to be very calm for me.
I think that started when you spoke to my mate Sophia.
What was that all about, by the way? What was that all about? Do you want to tell them that story? Who's Sophia?
So Sophia, who's a friend of ours, she says in the kitchen. So the girls are all
in the kitchen.
In the kitchen.
This is in Ian's kitchen, by the way.
This is my kitchen, by the way. And
how does my voice sound?
One of them says, Sophia says, "Oh, I love Jeremy Kyle. I hear you work with Jeremy Kyle." So I send Jeremy a text saying, you know, Sophia loves you. Then you call.
Yeah, because I'm a nice man.
Because you're a nice man on a video call as well.
Yeah.
So Sophia's going, is this real? Is this real? Is this an app with Jeremy's face on it? Yep. She thought it was she'd obviously had a few Prosecco's as well.